Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very special video that we have been thinking about making for a very long time. My name is Patrick Musilek. This over here is Chris Parker, and this down here is Cody Musilek. Say hello, everybody.
No relation.
Hello.
Yes.
It's coincidence.
Well, no, it is a relation, but that's right. We should say that, no relation. What would the odds of that be?
Exactly. That's the
Right,
joke.
that's the joke, of course, yes. So anyway, we've been wanting to do this video for a long time. So what this video is going to be is all of us sort of discussing metal in general. We're going to discuss several things, but I think what we're going to kind of try to focus on more in this video is like what makes a song or a band metal. Like, so what is metal essentially? And then also, why do we like or dislike metal? That's kind of the two sort of main ways we're going to approach this. Now, I want to say right off the bat, why should you listen to us? Well, maybe you shouldn't, because we are just average guys. We're not metal experts, I wouldn't say. I have been listening to metal personally for over 20, probably 25 years at this point, maybe even close to 30 years as I get closer to 40. Chris Parker is a pretty big fan of metal as well, right? Mm-hmm. And Cody is actually not really a fan of metal, so I think his opinion is pretty important in this video, maybe more important than ours. And so we're just average guys. Don't expect us to know everything. Not one of the three of us really plays the guitar. I can play the guitar. I've made songs, but I wouldn't call myself a guitar player at all. I don't, you know.
If only there was somebody who we could bring on the show that loves metal, embodies metal, and plays guitar in a metal band, and has for some time. But there's just nobody like that in any of our circles of influence.
Nobody like that would be good to do a video like this with.
No.
That would be counterproductive to have said person on.
You know, I think it'd be exactly that.
Yeah.
The video would be 10 minutes because he would shut it all down and we'd
be like,
go home.
This isn't metal. It's not metal. Well, which, by the way, we're talking about the other contributor to the channel, Chris Schoenberg, whose band Primal Waters, former band Primal Waters. I'm repping their hat. So Chris is here in spirit with us.
I was actually going through some stuff with my mom the other day that she packed up to send to me from her house, sitting around for whatever. And a black Primal Water sticker of that exact same ilk is in that list.
Awesome.
In that pile.
Yes.
So
they threw those things at everybody on the street for a couple of years when they were kind of getting started. But anyway, before we get too deep into this, I just want to let everybody know, we don't call ourselves experts. We just like metal music. We're just average guys. We do a lot of metal reactions here on the channel. This channel has been gaining a little momentum and subscribers over the last 2 years because I personally had not heard any of the Metallica albums. So we have reactions to all of their albums, their whole discography. So go check those out if that sounds interesting to you. If you're watching a video about metal, it might be. If this is your first video here, like I said, go check around the channel. In this video in particular, we're going to be maybe doing some reactions. We're going to be watching a few, I think what might help us sort of define and explain metal, some videos that help us do those two things. And so I have not seen several of the videos. Some of them I have, some of them I haven't. So we'll be doing actual reactions to a couple of them. They're from channels that I love, though. And one of them, Chris, is a video that I have wanted us to react to for a long time. It is from the YouTube channel 12 Tone. And who is the guy, if you remember, we talked about his videos a couple of years ago. He's the guy that like writes and makes his whole videos on sheet music. Do you remember that? Maybe it was Chris Schoenberg who likes his videos too, but they're extremely well-made videos about different musical topics, including all genres of music. But this is a video he made specifically on what makes heavy metal heavy. And so I'm very excited to get into that. So we'll be doing a full reaction to that, which it's a 20-minute video. So I'm excited to do that. And I love that guy's videos. So that's something we're all going to enjoy, I think. And then I have a couple of other videos that we'll bring up if it comes up for us to discuss. Yeah, so I don't know. We don't have too much else to mention. We don't have to worry about copyright stuff with this unless any of the YouTube videos get us. So if I have to cut stuff out, I will. If I have to cut audio out of the videos, I will. We'll just see what ends up happening. This, for me, is just more of a podcast thing, really, for us to just kind of all sort of discuss our opinions and our feelings about metal. And one of the main reasons we're deciding to do this right now is because the three of us are going to be doing a series of videos here on the channel reacting to my personal favorite metal band, Raunchy from Denmark. They are back after a 10-year hiatus, and they have been teasing a new album coming out later this year. And so I thought it would be a fun series of videos for us to go through and listen to some songs from their first few albums, some songs from albums from the middle of their catalog, and then do full reactions to their two most recent releases, which I think are both perfect 10 out of 10 albums if you don't include the audio mixing on their most recent album. So this is sort of to kind of prep us for that and to sort of help Cody maybe sort of understand what he should be trying to listen for, or maybe give him a different mindset going into these series of videos, because he is not very familiar with metal at all. So if you're okay with it, Cody, do you want to maybe start this video off by just kind of talking a little bit about what you think about metal, what your maybe preconceived notions are that you think are probably wrong, or that you think are right? Really anything however deep you want to go into it, you can. But yeah.
Yeah, sure. So I guess when I think of heavy metal, as I call it,
right,
you guys should say metal.
Well, because to me, heavy metal is a different genre of music.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
I did not expect
heavy
that.
metal is a genre of music within the metal umbrella.
I look forward to hearing what your definition of that is, because I was going to say proof that someone does not interact with metal often
Right.
is using the term
Sure.
heavy metal.
It's heavy metal. You're listening
That's
to
right.
old heavy metal.
The scene in Inglourious Bastards where he holds up 3 fingers.
That's a great movie, but I haven't seen it in long enough to.
Yeah, so it's kind of tough to, like, when you don't like something, you don't go out of your way to learn much about it and listen to it more.
Right.
So I feel like I've heard enough metal music to know that I don't enjoy listening to it generally. There's no music that I like that actively like makes me upset or angry to listen to. Like,
Show
I could
tunes.
listen to anything, and in
show
fact,
tunes, punk music.
well, yeah, and I think everything has a place. Like, I think
Sure.
if someone invited me to a metal show, I would be excited to go because that sounds cool. Like, whether I like the music or not. So I think there's something to be found in everything. But I was trying to think about this today of like, what is it about metal that I don't like? And I think when it comes down to it, I think I like more vocals in a song are really important to me.
Okay. That's yeah.
I like songs that you can sing along with, that are easy to understand. And to be fair, I'm sure every single thing I will say, you can point to a metal song. It's like,
No,
well,
that's
what
all right.
about this band?
No, that's all right.
So,
Don't worry about don't second guess yourself too much with this.
Yeah.
Because it is all just personal opinions, all of this.
Yeah.
So
And I know metal is so broad that I'm sure it's like, okay, not all of them are screaming. Not all of them are unintelligible.
Right.
There's always counterexamples. So, but just in general, I would say metal music not as fun to sing along to. As far as like guitar goes, I'm not even really like a big guitar forward person. So like I can appreciate a nice solo, but like I was never into like Jimi Hendrix or I don't know. So there's some of these other like Deep Purple or something where it's like guitar is really forward and like that's the main thing you're listening to, which I believe is pretty common in metal. Yeah, and so just it's a culmination of like usually not having the elements that I do like. It's not a lot of like elements that I dislike. It's like it's just missing something that makes me engage with the music and want to keep listening to it.
Okay.
That's an angle I haven't heard before. Like, oh, I love me some banjo and it just isn't showing up.
Right.
So Chris, I think the next step should be for us to kind of, what do you think? Do you think we should talk about how we feel about metal, or do you think it's important for us to try to define what metal is?
Oh boy.
First?
I feel like both of those are going to be pretty Herculean tasks.
Yes. Yeah. I'll say, I think that one of the things that's so cool about metal is that, like a lot of things, but I feel like in terms of music genres, it is definitely one of the most owned, like by the people who like it, genres the most. Like people who are metalheads, they really embrace the genre more than other people who listen to only country music or only, I don't know if there's anybody that really just listens to only pop music, because pop is such a broad thing anymore nowadays. But like, you know, people who only listen to jazz, people who only listen to blues, those people may only listen to those genres, or at least in a majority of their listening is to those genres. But in the metal community, there is really truly like a sense of like togetherness, but also it's extremely divisive. You know, so probably the most hating ass haters are metalheads to other genres of metal and stuff they don't like. But as a whole, like metal is very inclusive, very welcoming, and also I feel very owned by the people who listen to it, maybe more so than any other genre. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it has a lot to do with what metal generally stands for, especially as it came up in the 70s and 80s, and it was sort of it's a very outsider's perspective kind of music, because like especially early on, in its inception, it was like the satanic panic days of the 80s, when it was like, if you listen to metal, then you are one with Satan and such and things like that. And so there was just a lot of like social deviancy, not even from the perspective of like to use deviant as a pejorative, just like, if it goes this way, then it's just kind of, it veers off, you're just separate from what is kind of the norm of music and society in general. And I think when you're in that position, when you are the type of person who feels that way about society and being left sort of like, what's the word, left behind by society, then you don't have a ton of things that you can cling to, because everything else is sort of part of the norm. And I think one of those elements, like that sort of culmination of all of that together, is a big part of why it has that really intense fan base, where it's like, well, if I don't have this, then I don't have anything.
Right. And I feel like that's very much shared with punk music a lot. And punk music is definitely, I feel like, especially origin wise, like punk music is definitely known for the like fighting the authority, going against the grain. And I feel like one of the sort of core tenets of metal music is that sort of like, you think that music is going in this direction, let's take it as far the other direction as possible. So
it highlights a lot of things, like to think about Metallica, for example, like lyrically, you get a lot of stuff that most people don't want to talk about, they don't want to look at. It has a certain, it's an allowance for darkness in a way that nothing else does, especially in the early days of it.
Right. And I think that, yeah, and so for me personally, in terms of the stuff that I like, I am not as familiar at all, and that's kind of one of the points of this channel. I am not as familiar with what people would consider to be like the origins of metal and the earlier years of metal. I'm very much more familiar with metal from when I was in high school, which was in the like around the year 2000, and then on. So maybe late 80s, like from 98, maybe late 90s. Like 96, 97, 98, and on.
So like the new metal days.
New metal is for sure, and then also getting into like different styles of European metal, and then stuff from the US, but much less from the US. But my point with bringing that up is not to get into decades or genres of music or anything yet. But I am way less familiar with things like Black Sabbath or the band Death, or or even like Motorhead, and then of course Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, Anthrax, Pantera, those bands in the 80s that made metal, essentially sort of took it from the sort of more rock direction that it started as and veered it off into the faster punk, but even more and more technical route that it became and is now. But now it's just it's now metal is everything. But
and I wonder too,
I'm less familiar with those things.
Like to start at nu metal and go forward from there, I feel like nu metal has a different place in music than traditional metal does, at least from like an Inception's perspective, the stuff I just talked about. Like I wouldn't apply anything I just said necessarily to like Limp Bizkit and Korn and
Right.
Slipknot
So
and stuff like
here's
that.
something, Cody, when we say new metal, do you know what we're talking about?
Is new metal the same as rap rock?
No.
Okay, because I've always kind of
yeah.
conflated those genres in my head.
No,
but yeah,
new-
I mean, I know Limp Bizkit.
Yeah, I think most people think of that a lot. I think you're not wrong in thinking that, but
Okay.
there were a lot of bands that did not use, and actually most of the bands that you would think of as being a rap rock band really didn't have rapping in them. They just had more rhythmic vocals.
Yeah.
Really, I mean, like a band like Slipknot, for example. I think they are definitely new metal, and they are not a rap rock band, but they definitely have very rhythmic, fast vocals
Yeah.
over a beat that is like maybe at times bobby rather than driving.
What about System of a Down?
System of a Down is one of the core new metal bands,
Okay.
and for a
that's
lot of
interesting.
people is like the one of the gateways into heavier music because they get extremely heavy.
I'd agree with that.
I like System of a Down too. I didn't buy their CDs, but I had a lot of friends that listened to them in high school, and so I heard a lot of them, and I liked it. Yeah.
That's weird to think of System of a Down as new metal. Like I do have an unintentional negative association with the term new metal. Like I hear that and I think a bunch of stuff that I don't want to be seen liking out loud. And I don't necessarily know why that is, but I don't know what bands I would classify as new metal either.
Yeah.
Or what you would classify System of a Down as, if not that.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
so, all right. So I didn't, okay, first of all, I do not want this conversation to just become genre stuff,
Yeah, yeah.
but we're getting into an important thing. And so for me, my definition of metal is, and then I'm going to refute this, I'm sure, in the next sentence and like break my rule. But to me, metal music is anything that is heavier than rock music.
Uh-oh. You used a word that also needs defined.
I know. So anything that is, and you don't have to have heavy there. It can be other words like that, intense, extreme, whatever. But any metal that is more than rock music.
It's so hard to define it without a subjective term being
I know.
like the core of the definition. Because I
Right.
keep thinking about like what is, how do I define it? It's like I don't know the answer. I was going to try to come up with it during the conversation because I don't have anything.
I know, and I told you I was going to look up like the wiki definition of metal, but I did not do that. If you want to do that, Cody, you can do that real quick while we're talking. But we also don't have to do that. This can be,
What was
'cause-
the senator that said, I can't define pornography for you, but I know it when I see
I know
it.
it when I see it. Right. You know metal when you honestly, like that's honestly like metal when you hear it because
Yeah.
it's so funny because, and again, these are not all questions we need to answer right now, but like, can a metal band make a song or even a full album that's not metal and still be a metal band? To me, once a metal band, always a metal band, unless you spend a long period of time specifically doing something else.
I think it depends on what the majority of their catalog looks like.
I would agree with that as well. And also it depends, it also can literally come down to something as silly as like, it depends on what their ultimate goal for the music was in the first place, and then also like what do you define something by in terms of its heaviness by the heaviest part that the song becomes or the heaviest song on the album or the least heavy song on an album? When a metal band inevitably does a ballad song, which every metal record I have has a song on it that's slower, that ballad song, I just think of it as a ballad. To me, a ballad is any song that's like a slow song, basically, as opposed to, and it is juxtaposed against the faster, more intense songs on the rest of the album. But like when a metal band does a ballad, for example, is that ballad a metal song? Even though if you never knew nothing else about that band and listened to it in context of other songs like it, like, is it still a metal song? And I would say yes. Once you're a metal band, everything you make is metal unless you say otherwise.
I don't know if I would go that far.
And maybe
but
not
I will say that brought up an interesting thought. Like metal bands have this sort of like hard one side or hard other side that they don't really exist in the middle. Like you either get your metal music or you get ballads, but you don't get Foo Fighters. Like you never get just something that is sort of nothing. That's just sort of like music that's
Right.
exists in the
funny.
milkiest, beigeiest.
I didn't realize that metal bands still did that.
Yeah, I would say
I always thought of that as
metal...
like a hair metal thing, where every single hair metal band had to have a
because they can't, and that's the thing. It's like if they are going to make non-metal music, it can't just be a regular song, because if you have a metal band making regular songs, then they're not a metal band. They've made a bad album. Right. So it's like all they can make is ballads after that, which is so interesting.
But it's true, but also not true. I mean, it really just depends on what the style of order. Okay. We're getting too far into an avenue I don't want to go down quite yet. Let's just real quick, Chris.
You can't put cages around this kind of conversation.
I know, but I want to try to keep it somewhat organized. So let's try to express, Chris, if we can, why we like metal, because I think that's relevant here. And I will start and just go off of something that you just said. I know it's our favorite question is why. So I've thought about this a lot over the years, and we have been having this conversation essentially by ourselves off to the side for many years now, Chris and I have. And for me personally, I like music. This is all genres of music. I like music when there is a lot of variety within the music. So I like a band, my favorite albums, a lot of my favorite albums, you really don't know what you're going to get from song to song. It is not... Every song sounds a little different. Every song has something that's unique to that song within each album. And then each album might have its own sort of feeling as well. And then, again, this is all genres. Mm-hmm. And to me, metal is the genre of music that I've found that has the widest gap between what's acceptable. Like, you could literally have a song on a metal album that is nothing but acoustic guitar and a guy singing for 5 minutes.
Yep.
The next song could be the most crushingly brutal, assaulting thing that has ever existed.
And not only could it be, it will most likely be.
It probably will be, exactly. And there are many, many bands who would do those two things in the same song. So for me, I think one thing that is like a concrete thing I can say is I like the crazy variety that exists within the small pockets of different styles of metal. And that it's metal in general, but also just like you can listen to a lot of metal albums that I love and be fulfilled in every possible way musically. And I personally like the variety that metal offers within itself as a genre. Mm-hmm. And I don't necessarily even just mean that there's many different genres of metal within its own. There's basically no parameters.
Yeah, it's a weird sort of genre that's like one of the only types of music that has the freedom to do anything at once.
Sorry, I choked on my Mountain Dew Star Spangled Splash from 4th of July. Yes, you're absolutely right. And metal there Cody, I'm sure you're not super well versed on all the subgenres of metal, and we'll get into this more, but like there's folk metal. There are metal bands who use handcrafted ancient instruments. There is tons of electronic metal where you mix all genres of electronic music with metal music. There's thrash metal, there's hair metal, there's all sorts of things. There's doom metal, there's stoner metal. And all these things, these words, these arbitrary words, they actually do have meanings, and they sort of help direct you and guide you into what you might be listening to when you click on a song that has genres listed or something. And I know a lot of people really hate the genreification of music, and specifically metal within the metal community. A lot of like true metalheads are like, genre is a myth. There's no such thing as genre. Whereas I personally like it as an organizational tool.
Yeah, that's all it is.
Yeah, to help you better understand what you may be getting into if you click listen. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's the variety. I also think that because I'm an audio engineer and because I come to music, one of the first things that I pay attention to when I hear something for the first time, it is the quality of what I'm listening to. I feel like if you make metal music that sounds bad, you are much less likely to be forgiven. One, nowadays it's very easy to make good sounding metal, so there's very little excuses left.
Relatively speaking.
to, I mean, sonic quality wise. I'm not saying you're writing the greatest song ever, but there's
No,
really,
I know, but I still even mean that. Like, relatively speaking, it's not easy.
Is it easier than other genres, or are you saying it's easier than it was 30 years ago?
It's much easier than other genres, and it's much easier than it was. You can, with a laptop, make a metal song that sounds identical to almost any band. All you have to do is download the plugins that band used, and you have the exact identical sounding guitar, the same kick drum, the same snare drum, the same cymbal sound, everything.
But you have to know how to use that stuff.
I understand that, but I'm saying, right, of course you do. But like I'm saying, if you are a metal musician, it is easier to make a metal song that sounds good than if you are a blues musician making a blues song.
Yeah,
or a
he's not
jazz
saying it's like
musician
easier to play. It's easier to record.
Right. It's actually probably much harder to play and compose than other genres of music. But all I'm saying is this. Again, this is all me coming from the point of view of what I like about metal. I feel like the level of acceptable quality is higher with metal than other genres, because if you make bad sounding metal, you will just be forgotten. And I guess you could say that about other things, but also there are really terrible sounding Bob Dylan songs, yet he is considered a classic, right? There's not a lot of terrible sounding metal bands that are famous or that are people that are well renowned. Led Zeppelin apart, because Led Zeppelin's awful and they sound terrible. They're not even metal. Shut up.
I think when you go back to the 60s, it's probably a different story.
Right, but sure. And you maybe being the first person to do something means something.
Yeah, you could make terrible music and still.
But in the grand scheme of things, but there were also good recordings that existed at the time, and they had the same technology. Whatever.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, you wouldn't be forgotten because of that back then. For whatever reason.
Right. Nowadays, it's inexcusable to make a bad sounding metal record, in my opinion.
Well, if you make bad sounding metal, then you just have punk. You just change genres.
Correct. That's definitely correct. So anyway, for me, high level of quality, and then also getting really technical about it. I like impressive sounding music, and to me, there's just something about the enormity that you can get with metal that does not that only happens in rock music. The fact, like, if you think about it, there's no other genre of music that is based on taking basically a brick wall of a sound and putting it on full left side of the stereo spectrum, doing the same thing on the full right side, and just having a giant, massive, just from top to bottom wall of sound that is just massive. And so I love that aspect of it, the enormity of the way that it sounds. And you can do that with rock music too. You can do that with any music where you're panning the same sort of thing to the left and to the right and get a big sound. But metal is based on the idea of guitar on the left, guitar on the right, drums and bass essentially in the middle with vocals and everything spread out and whatnot. And it's that core building block, those building blocks I like a lot, rather than other genres of music where it might be more of a variety in that regard. You know, if you listen to, pop music or whatever, you got kick, drum, snare, vocal essentially. And those are the main three elements with some little pings over here and things that fly around and whatnot. But the next song can be an acoustic guitar and a person singing, right? So it's like, but with metal, there's always that sort of core guitar on the left, guitar on the right, drum and bass in the middle, or drums and bass, guitar in the middle, vocals hopefully in the middle, unless you're an idiot doing something stupid in the mix. And I like that. I like the bigness of it, the enormity of the way that it feels. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So to me, those are some of the main reasons I like metal specifically. And there's more. We'll get into more. But Chris, what about you? What are the things you like specifically about metal?
I did have someone tell me recently that all the music I like, we were doing one of those things where I'll just like sit in a group and dump a bunch of songs into a shared playlist off to a Bluetooth speaker and just listen to it and talk about it as they all come up, whatever. And she told me that basically your first point, like all the songs that I like change a lot within the song. And I had never really considered that. Like I've thought that to be true about certain bands like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, but that's like the most extreme example. Mm-hmm. I hadn't thought that all of my music that I like does that. And I think, I just have the intensity of it and the fact that it is always, re-triggering your attention, as somebody with ADD, it is just, it has to be a lot or else I'm not even paying attention to it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
and then having it constantly switch keeps it fresh. You get bored easy if it's like, okay, well, I've heard the first 45 seconds of this song, and now I can tell you what the next 4 minutes sound like, and I'll just on to the next. Like that kind of.
Do you prefer shorter songs then?
No, I just mean like.
As long as they're changing.
When it comes to the application of it towards like a more normal, like I'm going to keep using Foo Fighters here as my example because they're just a very good, like middle of the road, milquetoast kind of band, especially these days.
Yeah.
But it's like, you're not going to, it's like, it's funny. I just had this thought to compare it this way. Like one of the things that I like specifically about JRPGs and even more so the Final Fantasy series is something that I learned early on. Was like you start off like I'm a kid in a town and I gotta go collect these apples for this guy, and by the end of the game you're on the moon fighting God in the form of a tree, and you're like tearing the universe apart, and that's like you make that progression all the way up to there. Whereas other ones, it's like you show up and you're like, they're like, finally the chosen one. You're like, that's me. And then you go through the whole game as the chosen one. And then you get to the end. It's like, I did what I was supposed to do as the chosen one. You sure did. Roll credits. Like it levels out and you just have this really consistent flat progression. And that's kind of the same situation where it's like, when I start listening to The Pretender, I know what this song's going to be by the time, here it starts. Right. Okay, cool. This is not going anywhere interesting by the time I get to the end of it.
There's really no surprise to it.
Right. There's no surprise. It's not dynamic. It's not, I've got it all figured out. I've got places to be, so I'm going off to go listen to something else. And metal does a lot of switching all the time. Even Metallica, like that's one of the biggest things that they are known for is their transitions between different types of even like genre transitions, like when you talk about puppets, and even within the songs, like you get the riffs and then it transitions into a thing. Now it's solo time. Back into the riff thing, it's a little bit different. Like they're always mixing stuff up, and I think that that element of it is a big one for me too.
I agree with that, and I also think that for me, it's the same for me, but from a bit of a different perspective because I also use Metallica as my example of a band that is not necessarily for me because the core tenet of every song is just guitar, bass, drums, vocals. That's every Metallica song. They do not use many overdubs. They don't use other instruments in their songs. It is just them, essentially the way they would be presenting their music to you if you went to see them live. And I don't personally care for bands that are like that. All of the music that I like has that extra layer, that fifth or sixth layer, that extra layer of something else to it. And in the metal genre, sometimes it's as simple as just a piano, or more times often than not, a keyboard player or someone that does programming on a metal album. Maybe there's not a keyboard player in the band, but when you read the credits in the CD, it says programming by this person. And what that means is your songs could start with sound effects. They can start with some keyboards. They can have strings during a chorus. Bands that are more willing to do those types of things are the styles of metal that I inherently care more for on a personal level. But that really has nothing to do so much with the genre. So that doesn't have as much to do with the fact that it's metal, other than the fact that, again, it goes back to what I'm saying of the extremes, right? You can have a metal song going, and then all the metal parts of that song go away, and there's something else for a minute. And then when the metal comes back, it makes the metal feel heavier and bigger. And because you have those two sides going, like when everything goes away, say it's a metal band with a piano player. Metal band is playing, and then they go away and the piano plays for a while. The piano feels more like a piano. You appreciate it more for what it's doing because you're coming from something that's the complete opposite of that. And then when it goes away and the metal comes back, you appreciate it more because you just heard something else, the far opposite of the spectrum, for a little while. And it's that constant going back and forth of all these different elements that I find keeps me super engaged the entire time and makes me excited to listen to the next song because you really don't know what you're going to get.
Yeah, it's like when you design explosions, the best thing to have right before the explosion is a spot of total silence.
Right.
And then you just go from 0 up to 100.
Right.
Instead of having it all sort of blend in. Plus, when you're trapped within the confines of the spectrum of audio, there's only so much room for stuff And if it's all just super intense, that doesn't make a difference. It's just blah, 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 you can barely even hear it.
Yeah.
And another aspect of metal that I like is sort of, I would say kind of what you said, but more so about the intensity of it.
Okay.
I like to do a lot of really intense activities, like, just fast things, biking, mountain biking, racing, things like that. A lot of very like intense, engaging stuff. And metal is the music equivalent of that. Like the heaviest metal is jumping from an airplane.
Right.
And so that is, one of the, what's that?
It gets you pumped up.
Yeah. It's not even about being pumped up, because it just like, it's almost about merging with the action. Like getting pumped up is sort of like a pre-thing, where it's like you get pumped up before a thing and then you go. But this is the soundtrack to intensity.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I would agree. I see, and that's where it gets really interesting, because like Cody mentioned earlier, he's like, I'm sure there are metal bands that don't use screaming, metal bands that aren't there are metal bands that are not intense, like ever. And
yeah,
so that's it's really interesting.
Why are they metal?
But there's a certain intensity to
intensity doesn't necessarily mean fast and aggressive.
Right. No.
Yeah.
Intensity can mean, many different things.
But it can also be like when you have like a single guitar chord that's just like boom, and then it's huge. Mm-hmm. There's an intensity to that sound that bleeds more into your, the hugeness of the wall of sound aspect that you won't get from like Sarah Bareilles.
Right.
Even if, the notes are still
exactly.
notes, it's
and
still
you can
music,
still,
but for whatever reason.
Yeah, you can still have it produced perfectly beyond, with anything. And even some of the early, like when the term wall of sound came about, it wasn't about metal, right? It was about Phil Spector and his wall of sound and like the Wrecking Crew and Motown and some of that stuff, where they had giant horn or sax or horn sections and things like that. And essentially those elements are doing the same thing that guitars are doing. It's just a giant block of white noise set to pitches and a rhythm, and that's the foundation of metal. One other thing I want to say too, because I was just talking about the juxtaposing parts of the quiet parts and the loud parts, we'll just say. To me, metal vocals are the same way. And it's all about the appreciation of the thing that's coming back from being gone, right? So when I first got into metal, like most people, I was like, I don't like this like screamy stuff, right? I don't like this. And for me, I got into metal because I was exposed to a lot of heavy music through wrestling and through video game soundtracks. Those were the two big things for me. And I was exposed to bands like Seven Dust, who I feel are very much riding that line of, are they metal? Are they rock? They're a new metal band, which I'll just say for the record now, I don't personally consider a vast majority of new metal bands to be metal bands. I don't even know if I would overall say new metal is metal. I would almost argue that new metal is the new rock music. But then we'd have to discuss rock music and what is rock music, But whatever, we're not here to do that. And we can discuss that stuff more if you guys want to later. But for me, when it comes to the vocals, and I started listening to screaming, I've told the story a bunch before. I was listening to the Freddy vs. Jason soundtrack, and I had lots of movie soundtracks, video game soundtracks growing up. I love those. Still to this day, I like a good soundtrack because it exposes you to different things. Compilations are always great for that reason. But I got to the very end of the not the last song, but I think in the last three songs, I got to the first In Flames song that I ever heard. And I was falling asleep, and every time that song came on, it starts very intensely. Right away, from the moment it starts, it's just right? It's fast drums with a big kick pattern that is constant, right? Lots of triplets. And the guitars are, again, lots of triplets. Metal is triplets. We could put it on a t-shirt. Metal is triplets. Which triplet is right? And so that starts, and then he comes in and he starts screaming, and I skip it every time before it even gets to the vocals. I would always skip that track. Well, I was falling asleep once, and I was on the verge of sleep, and it got to the part. There's a part in the song right before the structure of this particular song, which is called Trigger, which is one of their biggest songs, is verse 1, verse 2, pre-chorus, chorus, verse 3, maybe repeating of verse 2, pre-chorus, guitar solo, chorus, whatever, it doesn't matter. But it got to the pre-chorus, and in the pre-chorus, all the guitars and everything goes away, and the vocalist does this cool little like really like quiet singy part, and there's just this kind of like this like electronic drum beat in the background that just goes, and he's doing this like thing, and everything's gone, and then boom, the chorus comes in, and it is more soaring, and it's clean vocals. I've come to realize, or actually that's cloud connected, whatever, doesn't matter. And when I was jolted awake, and I can remember so clearly picture this moment, I was jolted awake and I was like, whoa, I didn't know that this song did this. And then next time we were in the big city near here, I went and I bought that In Flames CD to try it out. And every song on that album was the same. Screamed verses, sung soaring choruses, and then, guitar solos and other parts of songs. But for the most part, for me, it was all about the screamed, more intense verse. And then you get to those choruses and it's just like letting go, right? It's just like, it's like you take the breath. It's almost the opposite of a drop in electronic music, right? Electronic music is all about the build. And you wait. And then in electronic music, when it drops, that's when you punch people. That's when you're fighting. That's when you're, blowing stuff up and, just being a crazy maniac. Whereas in metal, and the kind of metal that I like and still do to this day, but I like other stuff now, but the stuff that got me into it was you're listening to it and it's intense and it's heavy and it's building tension inside of you. And then when you get to the chorus, it's like, that's the breath. It's let go. That's the part you can sing with. That's the part where the vocalists really get to shine in terms of singing. It's where it feels like you jump off the cliff and you're flying rather than falling. Mm-hmm. And
that's good. I like that.
And I love that feeling of it. And so for me, almost all of the metal bands that I like do both intense vocals and singing vocals. So there's clean vocals and distorted or like screaming vocals.
And I agree with that big time. Like anything that's all screaming is, occasionally I'll come across a song on an album that's like that, but right. I do not gravitate towards metal that's all screaming.
Yeah. In the same way that every metal band that I grew up loving had a ballad, there's always that one song that's just melting faces from the moment it starts. Demon Hunter is one of my favorite examples of this. Demon Hunter is a band that both Chris Parker and I enjoy a lot, and they were one of the sort of core 6 bands that got me into metal music, and they have the template down perfectly. Distorted vocals during the chorus or during the verse, sung chorus that's fun to sing along with, really nice, welcomes you in and then pushes you back out and gets the intensity during the verses. But they always had a slow song that was more piano or like harpsichord based with acoustic guitars and only singing. And then they always had a song that was just screaming and intense riffage the entire time. And the same could be said for In Flames. The same could be said for Soilwork. The same could be said for Raunchy. The same could be said for Nemec. All these bands that I grew up loving, you can say the exact same thing about that. Every album had the ballad. Every album had the intense only song, and then every other song was sort of a mixture of those two elements. Mm-hmm. And so again, to me, a lot of it comes down to the juxtaposition of those like. And it's not necessary. I hate to just say the like low parts and the high parts, or the quiet parts and the loud parts, because it's more than that. Because you can have a song that's intense the whole time, but maybe there's some singing comes in, or this song just changes the way it feels, and you're getting those multiple emotions throughout each individual song. It is not just staying, like you said with the Foo Fighters. They're like the most white bread band of all time. I mean, they literally, the second the song starts, it's exactly what it's going to be, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, especially if you really like that. But for me, I like it when you experience. I've said this before with all of our reactions. I like it when every individual song takes me on a journey. I want I want to travel down the path of the song, and the path doesn't have to be straight. You can stray one way or the other. For me, I always feel like it's super important for them then to come back to the path if they stray really far away. But that's a structuring thing, and we don't need to get into that now. But like, it's that variety that really gets to the heart and the core of what I specifically like, I think, about it. And then how that is stretched, right? Because then you have one band where the variety is intensity and then electronics, dubstep. And then you have one band like Nightwish where it's metal, like 80s sort of hair metal sounding music with operatic female vocals and full orchestration. And those are both metal bands, just completely different ways to approach the sort of like metal structuring. All right, Cody, do you have anything to say, Cody, based off of what we've been talking about a little bit here? I know I'm not really asking you a question, but like,
no, I guess not. I've kind of been reading up on history of metal over here.
Okay, I mean, if you have anything you want to add, feel free.
Yeah, I'll jump in if I have anything.
But yeah, for sure do. So one thing I wanted to do last night in our Discord, which is something that everybody's watching this. If you enjoy this conversation, you should head over to our Discord. I'll put a link in the description of the video, and I'll really try to actually remember to put a link in the description of the video. I asked in our Discord for people to write a little paragraph or two about why they specifically like metal, and so I want to read a few of those out now, because we have really good conversations about metal and just all sorts of stuff over there. But I was reading some of the replies earlier today, and I think there's some really nice ones that people who enjoy metal for reasons other than what I do and other than what Chris does. So let's see here. Okay, so Will and Spencer 101 said, super excited for this, meaning this video. In my opinion, metal is one of the hardest genres to define. If you hear a pop song, you know it's a pop song. If you hear a rap song, you know it's a rap song. If you hear a country song, you know it's a country song. But there is a very large gray area with metal music where there is softer rock and extreme metal and then everything else in between that is defined by the individual person as either being rock or metal. And that's kind of what we were talking about before, but it's just interesting to hear another person put it in different words.
Yeah, but I feel like when metal's your genre, it's easy to say that. But, if country is your genre, you're going to say that about country too.
That's fair.
I mean, I guess so, but I really do feel like with metal, like I could contradict every single thing I say about metal and still be talking about other metal bands. Sure. You know what I mean? Like country definitely has more tight parameters than metal does. Yeah. Just, there has to be an element of country in your music that you're making to be considered a country artist. Whereas you could have a metal band that has no elements of metal in it and still be considered a metal band.
Yeah, but maybe country's not the best example, but I mean, rap is. I mean, I guess you have to be rapping in the song, but like, there's a lot of different types of rap. All these like overarching genres that are like really broad like that. I think like pop isn't even a genre, right?
Right.
Yeah, pop.
It really isn't.
A whole mess.
No. Mm-hmm.
So it's I couldn't listen to a song and know that it's a pop song. I think I would disagree with them on that. But I think it's easy for him to see that because he likes metal so much. Mm. And when you get deeper and deeper into something, you can always point to 100 different bands that sound 100 different ways. That
one thing I will say to kind of counteract that is one of the biggest conversations that has always and will always happen in metal is what is metal. Whereas I don't think if you're in the country music genre, I don't think you have conversations with other country fans about what is country and what's not. Maybe more recently with the advent of like country rap and some other things that they're doing now, and country music now is a lot less easily definable than it was, in the 80s and the 90s and then anything before that at all.
Yeah, and that's true of all genres.
Right, but what I'm saying is it is a specific point of interest and contention within the metal community that is one of the hearts of the community, is the genreification of metal, is like one of the major features of metal as a genre is what is metal. That's why Chris Schoenberg always says it's not metal, whereas I feel like you don't have that conversation as much in really like I suppose you have people talking about like posers in like the rap community or something, but I feel like you don't really have conversations that go that deeply into like the genreification of rap or hip hop or country or anything else as much as metal.
If you were to line up, this is probably going to be an annoying thing to say, but if you were to line up all of the subgenres of each of those categories, metal probably has the most of like, and that's
easily.
Because you've got your post-core and your metalcore and your everything else that's weird. I don't know.
Hey Google, how many genres of metal are there?
This will be good.
I'm not sure about the answer to your specific question, but according to Leroy's.com, categories of metal. When we use iron content as our guide, metals are divided into 3
There's heavy metals, there's light metals.
Alloys.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hey Google, how many genres of metal music are there? Let's be more specific.
Sorry, I don't understand.
Yes, you know.
You don't know nothing.
It seems like, do fans of these subgenres not like to be associated with the other subgenres of metal? I would assume.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
There's
it depends on
tribalism.
each one. I don't know if there's any subgenre of metal I don't want to be associated with, but
Well,
I'm
you
also
said new
not.
metal.
Oh, yeah, you got me there.
Yeah.
You got me there. How dare you remember what I say?
Sorry.
I'm sure there's a genre of metal called Ku Klux metal or something like that. Like I guarantee Ku Klux Core. I guarantee that exists.
Core Klux Klan.
Core Klux.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
sure
there's
that
definitely some metals you don't want to be associated with. I'm sure.
Yeah, so I'm sure there is.
Super true. Well, because I was going to finish that thought with, but I wouldn't consider myself to be like a hardcore metal person. Like that's.
Oh, sure.
Oh, yeah.
I exist in
Okay.
too many other facets of music, and I
Right.
don't really identify myself with things that are, I don't craft my identity with things that are just
Yeah.
like external oversimplifications of something.
Sure.
Yeah.
Whereas I would say that I am a metalhead. I would definitely say that, like,
More so than me. I'd agree with that.
yeah, but not as much as Chris. Although I do feel like I listen to a wider variety of metal than Chris does,
Agreed.
which definitely makes me better than him. Okay, so I have a couple other ones here I want to mention.
It's happening already.
Okay, so friend of the show, Creeps, said, and this is a simple one: I love metal music because it's always been seen as the outcast among the music world, and it's always stood for being different. I feel like that could be said punk music as well. Plus, metal allows you to get all of your energy out and channel it into something really special. So I think for a lot of people, metal is about channeling the sometimes negative, sometimes just overabundance of emotions and feelings you have in a world that maybe tells you not to have a lot of emotions. Metal is definitely a way to be like, I'm letting it all out here. And I personally, I think that's like when I have a bad day, a really bad day, there's a few albums that I just put on and I just, it's like, it's like that. It really is like that.
Which is so interesting because my bad days metal is never my go-to for that. I like sad bastard music like Brand New and Levi Weaver.
Okay.
And
Sure.
yeah, metal is much more of like I'm gonna do a cool thing.
Yeah, and I think those are kind of same coin, different sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
Here's one that I think is really.
Hold on. You're going to go on to a different one? I would say I was thinking about the difference of metal and punk music, and aside from just the musical difference, is the attitude of punks is like, F you, we want to be different than you. You're all slaves to the man. Whereas I feel like metal music kind of just came into existence as the music, and society was the ones that said, no, you guys are weird.
I would agree with that.
And so they kind of embrace that and says, oh, okay, we are different.
Yeah.
But I don't see it as angsty and angry as punk is nearly as much.
I think that something like Rob Halford, whose band is eluding me.
Judas Priest?
Judas Priest, yes. I think Judas
It's so
Priest
funny.
is a
I
good
literally
example.
read Judas Priest as you said Rob Halford.
Great.
That's
I think that he would be a good example of like, especially when metal had a lot more of like a leather association. Like even early '80s, Metallica's first like their demo tape, No Life Till Leather, like it was still very much an aspect of that type of music.
Yeah.
And I think that, there was a lot of the antisocial, or at least the social deviancy angle from his perspective is like how, being gay was really, that's a tough thing for him. And, why I think that metal was a place that he could go with that and then have it become, a home, I suppose.
Yeah.
But, so I don't know if I would say.
People say that all the time about groups of what looks like angsty outcasts. It's like, no, they're more accepting than anybody.
Yeah.
Society wouldn't accept me, but they accept everyone over here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But no, just to the, because I was saying about punk music, punk is very much, I think punk has a little bit more of a specific agenda than metal ever has.
Or it's more about having an agenda.
Right. Or it's metal, metal kids are punk kids that haven't gotten the newsletter yet, effectively. Some might say, I'm not necessarily saying that's true, but I think that you could make that argument probably, but
yeah.
I've got a couple more of these I want to read, and I think it'll go with kind of some of the stuff we're talking about. So this was the person who had the longest response, which I totally appreciate. This is from a Discord user named Foxard. They said, like one of the people that commented earlier who was joking around when I first posed the question, the guy just said riffs. And I was like, haha, LOL. But literally, for some people, it is all about the guitar riffs and the guitar and the function of the guitar. So this guy said, I like the riffs, LOL. But I love the identity that it has and that it makes me feel like I'm a part of something. It takes extremely talented musicians to pull off these songs. I'm pretty young, and so I didn't get into metal until somewhat recently, a little bit before COVID. So I started with System of a Down and Metallica, then Judas Priest. And what I love about here, let me get through it. And what I love about metal is how wide of a genre it is. System of a Down, Metallica, and Judas Priest are so different, yet they are all metal with their different subgenres. I watched some videos about metal and Metallica, and it said my first album, which I listened to the heck out of, was Master of Puppets, and it really got him into metal. And I learned that metal has its roots in classical music. So Mozart is the ancestor of Metallica in a way. And it says Cliff Burton was a student of music. Cliff Burton was a student of music and loved music theory and would write songs like they were a classical piece in a way, which you can totally tell when you listen to Metallica.
That's all the Burton. They always talk about how the more, the highs and lows and the orchestral elements of early Metallica is all Burton stuff.
Okay, let me see here. It says Judas Priest especially, they are softer in the beginning of their career, and then they get heavier and heavier as they reach their peak in the 90s, which is during the peak of metal/thrash metal with bands like Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, Pantera, Motley Crue, making those banger albums. And it says here something about the Judas Priest album Painkiller, blah, 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 goes on how much metal band can... Oh, it says it goes on to show how much a metal band can be flexible and so impressive and good as they change and do new things. And then he says... And then basically he kind of talks about the different subgenres of music and how he wants us to react to Judas Priest because he thinks that their catalog is really great. And I definitely want to do... I don't think that I personally will enjoy Judas Priest, so I don't want to say I'm going to do their entire discography of like 50 albums. But we would definitely do like what we did with Megadeth here on the channel, where we pick songs from throughout their career. And then if someone had maybe like a unanimous, like, this is the Judas Priest album, maybe I would consider doing that.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that. I've tried some Judas Priest, and I don't know. It's fun.
I just don't know if I could listen to the vocals. I do not care for hair metal style vocals, and from what I know of Judas Priest, that's what it would be. Here's another user, Evo Sleeper, says, I like metal because of how strange, unique, raw, and how emotionally powerful it is. I like how there are a lot of artists in metal who aren't hesitant to push musical boundaries and combine different styles of music that are sometimes completely parallel and unexpected, and who make music that is completely in defiance of the industry-approved and supported pop music. What a statement that is. What a sentence that is. I think that's something that is more present in metal than any other genre of music, except perhaps progressive music, which I think a lot of prog music is prog metal and prog rock, which is close to other genres of music. Even though, and almost despite that, a lot of metalheads are complete traditionalists, which is also so amazing and absolutely true. Like so many metalheads are like, no. Metallica is the only metal band ever. And it's like, no, dude, that is not true. And then this guy says, I much prefer riffs to solos because that's something that we discussed on the most recent Metallica video. Both Chris has said that they prefer riffs, listening to a good riff over a good solo, which was very surprising to me because when we first started listening to Metallica, all anyone would talk about was their solos. But it's true.
Yeah, I don't. That's funny.
Well, I mean, right, but it is true. The guitar riffs are like the core fundamental aspect of metal, and we'll get into that more in a second. I just want to read a couple more of these, and then we can kind of break down what people were saying. Unless you guys specifically want to talk about a specific point. This is Tor Harold, and I apologize if I said that wrong. This guy's from Germany, and he and I feel the same way about a lot of music. He and I are on the same wavelength with a lot of stuff. So shout out to you, Tor. Hopefully that I'm saying that correctly. He says, I like it when metal is mixed with other genres like prog, folk, I think he means electro maybe, and more. He says ETNO, and I don't know if that's ETNO. I don't know. I think he might have meant electronic or something. I like it when metal alternates with cleaner sections just to hit even harder after the calm section is over, which is exactly what I was talking about. Just like alternating between harsh and clean vocals. I like it when unusual instruments are used. A good example of some of these points is the band The Who, which Chris is very familiar with, which I don't even know if I would consider them metal, but I guess they are. I haven't heard enough of their stuff.
Man, that's a really interesting question because they do. I think that they're more rocky, but they also do covers of metal.
Like, there's not a lot of like modern folk rock stuff. There's a lot of folk metal, so I don't know.
Yeah, it could be metal if they use different instruments, which I think is a whole new
thing to bring up. Let's not get into that.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a guy named Tommy Trinkeller. I can't define metal, but I know it when I hear it. It's an attitude. It's an ethos. It's a complete product of instrumentation, tone, melody, tempo, subject matter, aesthetic, etc. At the end of the day, it's a vibe. It's anger, it's sadness, it's joy, it's excitement, it's catharsis. It's whether or not it taps into a certain visceral part of me that I'm not sure even resides in my brain. It's just metal. And I think that is a great way to put it.
That's the end of the show. That's like
really, yes. It's anger, it's sadness, it's joy, it's excitement, it's catharsis. And I think catharsis is a great way to put what we were trying to say a little bit earlier, that like whatever your emotion is that you have an abundance of inside, metal will get it. You can strain that through metal, no matter what kind of emotion it is. Do you agree with that?
I'm not the kind of person that listens to music when I'm feeling emotional. And I know that that's kind of weird because everyone kind of goes to their favorite genres. I guess
I don't know, man. I know people who don't listen to music, and I don't understand.
Yeah, those people are weirder, but
it's
well,
busted.
And it's fun for us. It's interesting for us to be talking about this too because we all three of us have talked, or Chris and I have at least said, like we do not listen to music for lyrics. Like I am not listening to a song and like connecting with it on such a deep level that I feel like related to the song. To me, it's purely about like the sounds I'm hearing. You know, that's why I've said many times before. That's why I like to listen to music in other languages. You don't have to worry about that. But
I don't listen for lyrics because if I were to listen for lyrics, I would have to listen for lyrics. Like my default listening focus is always going to be on the music. So it's either the music or what's being said.
Right.
And I can't do both. And so, because then when I find out, like, when I do get lyrics like figured out or like learn what they're about, which is a whole different layer of something I'm terrible at, then it's like, this is fun. Like when I found out what Into the Ocean by Blue October was actually about, it was like one of the coolest. I was like, whoa,
yeah,
this song is so much better now.
Yeah.
I had no idea before.
But the flip side of that can happen too, where you love a song and then you read the lyrics and it's just like, oh man, this is the dumbest thing I ever heard. And it can ruin it for you. But my point with that was, I think when a lot of people think about the emotional side of music, they're coming at it from the point of view of relating to, or at least coming at it from a lyrical perspective. But I think what I said earlier and what the person was saying still stands. It doesn't matter what your emotion is. Even just musically, you can still use the metal as the conduit for that emotion, whether you understand what they're saying or not.
Yeah, I mean, like the feeling that you get at any breakdown point in a song, where it's like there's not even any lyrics here. They just drop this, and now it's twice as heavy, and I want to pull that tree out of the ground and swing it across the house. Like,
yep. And a lot of people, those are their favorite moments in the songs. They're waiting for those.
Absolutely.
It's just like electronic music is the same way. Infected Mushroom is the same way. Dubstep is the same way. You're waiting for that moment where it's the building of the tension and then the release of the tension, or even like the focusing of that tension into something more intense or whatever. Dark Joker 808 says it depends on the type / subgenre. If it's faster thrash, I like the tightness and technicality of at that specific speed. If it's grooves, it's riffs and like feeling like it's in the pocket, like a groove. If it's doom, sludge, stoner, it's the textural soundscape. If it's prog, it's headbanging to odd time signatures. If it's old school, it's really the organicness of it. And it says, I don't listen to much new metal or metalcore type stuff, but I find that they seem to have more distinct melodic elements sometimes. I also just love a good crunchy guitar sound. And to me, it is like, there's like a very gratifying thing to like a really good guitar sound. We've just got a couple more here, so I'll read these. Joker, who's someone who comments all the time on Discord, says, for me, metal music has an energy and power that no other genre can even come close to, other than perhaps classical music. It can also have beautiful melodies, heart-wrenching emotion, furious anger, and so many emotions and moods have room to breathe in metal music and not in other genres. In my opinion, it has room for such wide ranges of emotion. And then he says, plus, I mean, come on, what's better than a kick-ass guitar riff? The last person to respond was Ravish, and they say, I love the sound of metal, guitars, drums, how it all sounds together and what kind of sounds these instruments make. I adore how talented metal musicians have to be to pull off great metal songs. I love riffs and then guitar / drum solos and shredding. I'm not a big fan of growling, but I don't necessarily listen to music for vocals. I could listen to instrumentals all day. That's why maybe other styles of music I don't like so much, because they are not really as diverse and interesting instrumentally. And I definitely think that for certain styles of music, that's true. You know, when like a person can listen to metal their entire life and love it and never have paid attention to a single word uttered. Whereas I feel like, and it's not necessarily about the words so much, but with other genres of music that are a bit more tightly defined, like we were saying earlier, you know more what you're going to get going into it, so you're less likely to be able to search on a deeper level through the instrumentation and the technicality and the prowess and all that stuff. Not saying that like country guitar players aren't like fantastically talented, because they are, but what they're doing is being presented in a much more simple way, and their quality of playing and technical musicianship comes out in more of a feeling rather than a like tangible, like you can look at some metal guitarists and be like, wow, it is like looking at a classical violin, you know, of someone doing some sort of a concerto or something and just like shredding on the piano or a violin or something. Like that happens in metal. And there are solos in other genres of music for sure, but I don't know. I feel like I'm kind of digging myself into a hole. I keep thinking of like, well, if I say that, it's not necessarily true. So I'm going to just change change direction. So those were all the comments we had for the most part. I skipped a couple things, and there were some people who replied and had nice replies, but those are some of the main comments we had, saying, having people on our Discord sort of go through and talk about why they enjoyed metal. And I feel like a lot of it kind of was vibing and grooving with what we were talking about, but there's also other people, when people say the guitar riffs, it is true too. Like, there's just something inherently cool and badass about a really cool guitar riff. But the problem with that is you could be talking about a Metallica guitar riff from Load, or you could be talking about a Metallica guitar riff from Master of Puppets, which are two different, completely the two different ways to approach having like a cool guitar riff. One's a technical like lead instrument that you're supposed to pay attention to, and one is more of a groove, rhythm based feeling, more of a vibe, rather than a look at me, I'm impressive. It's more of a vibe. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I feel like those are sort of, if you want to boil it down, this is one of the things I was thinking about. Like, to me personally, I feel like metal can be broken down into two different ways of approaching it, as the more rhythmic and they're both really technical, so I don't want to say less technical, but the more rhythmic approach, and then also the more lead approach. And this is mostly coming from the perspective of the guitarist, but almost every metal band, the guitar is the lead instrument, the lead thing you're hearing. And
maybe that's something I'm missing with metal is I don't listen to a song and be like, wow, what a great guitar riff. And I don't know why that is, but like if I think about...
Yeah, I was going to say, think about like your top 5 guitar riffs you've ever heard. Like, what would you say they are?
I don't know. I don't know. It's like, if I think about, I'm trying to think of like newer metal music I've heard that I like. And I would say, and newer is, it's 30 years old, but like, I've liked what I hear of System of a Down. I like some like Danzig, if that's metal, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But when I think of both of those, I think of Danzig's vocals, and I think of Serge Tankian. He sings in there, right? So
Serge, yep. And then there's like their guitar player.
I can picture songs from them, but I am picturing the words and the vocals. And so I think it all comes down to the vocalist for me when it comes to music. And it's if you just I would not want to listen to just a metal song that's all instrumental. Like, I'm not getting much from the riffs. And I also don't appreciate, in the same way that anybody that's done any work or musicianship, I don't appreciate a talented musician the way that all of you guys do.
Well, but don't get too caught up on that, though, because when I was in college, I really let that get to me. And I felt really like inferior to like anyone that could play any instruments even halfway decently at all, because I was so terrible. And what it did was
feel that way.
Well, that's because it's true and I understand it now, but I'm okay with it. but like I really did let that affect my opinion of a lot of stuff. When I was in college, the new Dream Theater album comes out in a couple of weeks, and we're going to do a reaction to it here on the channel. And when I was in college, some of my friends tried to show me Dream Theater, and all I saw was, wow, this is like so far above and beyond my understanding of what this is, that I didn't allow myself to try to appreciate it in any way. I just got too in my own head about that, and I was just like, no. And now I'm excited. I have not listened to Dream Theater since then, and I don't know. Literally, if you said what's any Dream Theater song, I would have no clue. So I'm very excited to listen to the new stuff, because I feel like I have a much better appreciation and understanding of the technical side of it, yes, but you can also take all the technical stuff away and just be like, what section of the song are we in now? And what are they choosing to do? What's happening now? And this gets into like how we all listen to music differently and everything. And so I would just say, when you're talking and thinking about metal, don't let the technical side of it ever prevent you from enjoying something. Because to me, that is like a very immature way of thinking about it, and I did that for so many years. I'm sorry.
Think about that for anything else. Like, I don't want to watch football. Those guys can throw a ball further than I could even imagine. Like, that's
Right.
the reason that you're doing it.
Million
That's the reason
percent.
you're watching it. Or
That's why it's
listening to it,
entertaining.
whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. For sure. And I think for me, it was because I was trying to sort of be a musician, and I always do that. I can pick a guitar up and make a song, which is more than so many people can do. And so I just allow myself to appreciate that rather than focus on, well, I might as well not even try because I can't play like, the dude from, Dragon Force or Herman Lee or whatever. Like I'm not Herman Lee. So it's like, that's not an excuse to not make something or to ever try. In fact,
look at all the stuff that exists that's not that.
Right. Exactly.
But looking at it from the opposite way, do you find yourself hearing a new song and be like, "Wow, this is catchy. I like the riff, but this is pretty easy. They're not really. They don't have to be that talented to play."
That happens a lot.
Yeah.
Because that seems like a kind of a slippery slope, and I never think like that either.
Right.
Like,
well, and Chris,
it's either catchy or it's not.
Yeah, Chris and I talk about that from a production standpoint a lot, and he got mad at me earlier when I said it's easy to make metal, and he was like, "No, it's not," and I was like, "Yes, it is," and it really, legitimately is to make good sounding metal. I'm not saying make good metal. I'm saying make good sounding metal, and so we do have those kind of conversations as well. And metal, just like any other genre of music, also has totally manufactured and completely fake bands within it as well. Like there are completely manufactured and fake metal bands that are made by record labels and studios, and the people are all picked and put in the band, and they're pushed and all this, like just like any other genre of music.
Like who?
Like baby metal or any of the Japanese metal stuff like that, but that's how Japanese music all is. Like a vast majority of Japanese and Asian, as far as I understand, K-pop is like this too. It is all manufactured,
I mean, you look at Hatsune Miku, like she's
not even a real person. So, 100%. But for bands, I think about stuff like I do know of some bands like Sonic Syndicate or like, Amaranth and certain bands that are just like it almost makes me feel guilty listening to it because I'm like, this is so manufactured and made like if you took polls of like what the song should be about and so silly or like smash into pieces and think like even that Self-Deception album, Chris, that was on our list this year, that to me feels very manufactured and incredibly fake and surface level. But we both really enjoyed it because
it's rad. Yeah.
It was rad and badass and cool. And so it's like, but I just wanted Cody to know too, like that exists in metal as well. Like the total opposite of what we've been talking about, the like pushing against society, like all these things. The other end totally exists too, where it's just manufactured. 100%.
But here's a question. Here's a thought though. That's not metal.
Well, that's an interesting thought. But see, and then the thing is, like in the United States, those kind of bands really don't exist. But we also have to take into account that if you go to Norway or Sweden and you watch Norway's Got Talent, there are metal bands that get to the top like slots of that show because metal is to Norway as country is to the United States. Like there are countries in the world where a majority of, maybe not a majority, but like you turn on the radio, you're going to hear metal. Whereas like where I live in Nebraska, you're lucky to ever hear a metal song on the radio. And there's only one channel that would put a metal song on, and it would probably only be late at night, and it would be the alternative sort of like college radio station. So like, and you would never see a metal goth person on TV for anything ever. Like you would never hear metal music in a commercial for something unless it's some like a car commercial or something trying to be, whatever. But like,
well, it would never be on top of the Billboard charts.
It would, right, exactly.
For the singles, at least.
Whereas some of these Scandinavian countries, like Nightwish is one of the top selling, if not the top selling Finnish metal act like of all time. And so it's like, there are different levels of appreciation of metal and more levels of metal being integrated into culture and all that stuff too in other parts of the world. We can only come at it from our perspective. So yeah, let's see. All interesting stuff. I think this is all great, but I think we should watch one of these videos here. Okay. So this first video that I have pulled up for us here, this is one I've been wanting to watch for 2 years with both Chris's, and the other Chris isn't here, so we're going to just forget him. This is... I sent you guys the links. This is What Makes Heavy Metal Heavy by 12 Tone. It should be that first link that I sent you guys. And this is one of my all-time favorite YouTube channels. I don't watch a ton of his stuff because I do feel like he is a little bit over my head in terms of what he's explaining music theory-wise and stuff. But also, the videos of his that I've seen are like 10 out of 10 perfect. Like, the production is amazing. The style of the video is great. And the question he poses here, Chris, let's talk about it just briefly. What makes heavy music heavy? So, Cody, I would love to hear from you first. When you think heavy music, what do you think of? What makes it heavy? And then, like, what would be an example of that?
I guess the instrumentation, but I mean, I don't know. You can have like a really.
This is a very difficult question. We've talked about this for many years.
There's a band I like called Vanilla Fudge that's from the 60s, 70s, and they would do like covers of like You Keep Me Hanging On and kind of like 60s, almost a lot of pop songs, but they would do it in like half speed and just go like really slow and I would say heavier, like they're and you've kind of described doom metal as kind of similar to that, and so I would say that would be heavy, but also if you just had a really fast guitar riff that's like in your face, I would describe that as heavy, and that's completely different. So I just more intense music, I guess.
Right. And where we always get hung up on this conversation, which we've had many times in our Metallica videos, is when you get talking about the semantics of everything. What's heavy? How do you define heavy? How do you define intensity? How do you define extreme? You know, how do you define these things? And the fun part of it to me is like, it really kind of is all up to every individual person's own discretion as to how they feel about it. And that's kind of one of the things that's so interesting. Chris, what do you think makes heavy music heavy?
I think maybe a little bit too much of an oversimplification, but I think low and slow takes care of a lot of it.
Okay.
But I think that heavy can apply to stuff that's not metal.
Like electronic music, dubstep and
electronic
stuff like
music, rap. I think that, the really like intense hardcore rap can get pretty heavy in that same kind of sense. Yeah, I mean the labeling of the power chord, I think, is sort of indicative of what it means. Like, that particular chord on a guitar has power, and for a reason. At least that's how I interpret it, because maybe it means something totally different, like power of 6. But
like to me, with what you're talking about now, to me, the opposite of the power chord in terms of the way I always think of it is like AC/DC, right? You think of any AC/DC riff that's like a famous AC/DC riff, right? Da 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 da. Right. What they're doing is open chords on the guitar. They're playing, like, if you had an acoustic guitar and you gave it to them, it would be jump, 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 like it could strum that, right? Whereas with a power chord, it's much more of there's less tones happening in that sound. And generally it's more distorted and like lower frequencies because you're using the lower tuned strings rather than the higher tuned strings. So you're not getting any of the brightness of that. It's just the lows. And so when I think of a band like AC/DC, to me, I would never consider them to be metal ever.
no.
But in the same token, like, I would never think of like Black Sabbath being metal or something, because I would equate them to being at their heaviest, probably less heavy than AC/DC. Not that heavy is the only qualifying factor of what makes something metal, as we've discussed. But
It almost like crossing the streams, like in Ghostbusters, where when every instrument in the band is playing the same thing at the same time. Yeah.
yeah, that's a very metal thing. 100%.
Yeah, and that's like the
100%.
heaviest parts of the song. It's like 2 guitars and a bass are just like,
Yes.
it's got that, and everybody's doing the same thing. Like that is really good.
And also I should just say too, like from a bare bones of like what's happening, a lot of metal, especially modern metal, is down tuned a lot. Like the standard guitar tuning is E tuning, and most metal, like Linkin Park, for example, tuned down to C, or sometimes D, but sometimes C. Right, so what you're doing is, instead of E being the lowest note you can have, you go down 2 whole tones to C. And that just makes it heavier because it's lower. The granules of the distortion are farther apart, and there's more low frequencies in it. And then you can have more of a chuggy, enormous feel to it. But bands like Metallica, I think most of their songs are in standard tuning, and they definitely feel quite heavy during parts. So that's interesting to point out as well. Okay, so I think for me, what makes heavy music heavy, it's really interesting what you were saying, Cody, because I think both Chris and I do kind of agree with you. Like, slower does imply heavier, but to me, heavy isn't the only thing you're talking about when you're talking about metal, and I'm not saying you guys said this, but to me, metal has like an intensity to it as well, but it's not just necessarily intensity to how heavy something is, because like Chris Schoenberg, if he were here, he would say the opposite of what we're saying. To him, metal is not about being slow and sludgy. Metal is about being fast and technical, and like you're trying to catch up to it almost. That's where he's kind of coming to it, approaching
That's the metal part. This is the heavy part. And then when you get heavy metal, it's when they do both.
Right. Correct. That's a simple way of saying it, but honestly, I think you're probably right with you're onto something there.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and bring this up here. I'm super excited for you both to hear this. I have not seen this one yet. I found this years ago when he released it. How many years ago? 1 year ago. Last year, it looks like. I found this last year, and I've literally been saving it for this moment, I guess. So are you guys ready? You got it pulled up?
Yep.
All right, this is what makes heavy metal heavy. And if we get halfway through this and we're like, I think we've got everything we need to from this, we can pause it. We don't need to listen to the whole thing.
That's very YouTube.
In 3, 2, 1.
Hey, welcome to 12 Tone. Check this out. That's a clip from the song Farewell Sputnik by the Spanish grindcore band Urnia, and I think most listeners would agree that it sounds pretty heavy. Maybe even unpleasantly so if you're not used to this sort of music, but for metalheads, heaviness is everything. It's often said that the history of metal is an ongoing quest for heavier and heavier music, and while the actual story is a lot messier than that, it's also not wrong. But what is heaviness? What are we actually looking for when we try to make music heavy? That's easy. It's tritones and distortion. And if that's a good enough answer for you, great. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. But if you spent any time in metal circles, you know it's not that simple. Different metalheads who listen to different metal bands define heaviness in all sorts of different ways, and they can get really angry if you use it to describe the wrong things. So while I fully recognize that I'm dancing through a minefield here, I dug up a bunch of perspectives on what heavy actually means, and I'm gonna see if I can't combine them into a sort of grand unified theory of heaviness.
Good.
Wish me luck.
I'm wondering if we should just edit the whole chunk of us watching that out and then leave it up to people to watch it if they want to know what we're talking about.
Okay, so what do you guys have a lot to say based off of that? I mean, I think we agreed with some of the stuff. I think I agree with most of what he was saying, and I think he was very articulate in the way he said a lot of what we were trying to say earlier, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I like his breakdown of it. I don't know. I mean, at this point now, what was that, 12 minutes of video? And I don't know if I remember
20.
a whole lot that I can point to specifically, but say 20?
Yeah, it was a 20.
Yeah, 20. So 20 minutes.
So is it the case that the difference between modern and older metal is it's more technical and rhythmic?
I would say no.
I think there's
I would
several
say now
differences.
it's much less technical.
Okay.
I would
think
agree with that.
It's
As opposed to when are you talking?
well, see this goes into exactly what I was saying before about how I feel like it's easier to make metal music now sound good because when you're listening to any modern metal now, and I'm going to just say any, maybe doesn't apply to all, but I'm going to say 99% of everything. The drums that you're hearing are all replaced drums. So like back before they had the computer technology available to do that, everything you had to be a band that was good enough to this is with any genre of music too, but with metal as well. You had to be good enough to go in the studio and perform your songs, and then the person recording you had to record them in such a way that it sounded good without the advent of all the cheating that we call it to make your album sound good after the fact. Nowadays, every single thing you hear that's heavy has all of this stuff done to it. There's octave stuff put on every instrument to make the lows feel even lower. Every kick and snare you hear is probably a combination of what they recorded at the time. It is probably like 80-20, like 20% what they recorded and 80% like the most perfect sounding kick drum that they felt perfectly represented the feel they were going for. Same thing with the snare. And bass, a lot of the times on modern records, bass is probably just programmed. Like a lot of metal where you hear nowadays doesn't even have a bass player playing bass in it. It's just programmed. Or the guitar player plays the guitar, and then they have programs where we'll see it in one of these other videos. A guy plays a guitar riff, and he loads that guitar riff into a program, and it literally makes a bass part out of that guitar part. So it's like, the reason I say metal is less technical now is because you can just make something that's just crushing lows and then throw like electronic music and stuff over the top of it and then have whatever kind of vocals you want over the top of it. Because metal is more accessible and easy to make, you have more people making simple metal. As opposed to in the past, when it was more technically difficult to achieve a good sound, you had to be more technically proficient to go into the studio, and you also didn't have, I mean, obviously in the 80s and stuff, like you could use keyboards and things, but one of the things about metal that we didn't even talk about is like Chris Schoenberg does not believe a song that has keyboards in it is a metal song. He thinks it's a pop song, which is totally ridiculous. And so for a long time in the metal genre, there was this stigma of using things that weren't guitar, bass, drums, vocals. And thankfully, I was getting into metal music right when that stigma was starting to go away. And nowadays, that stigma does not exist really anymore. And most bands use programming and keyboards and all these other things in their music. It depends on the genre of music. And even if you don't use those elements, you still are probably using some sort of synthetic digital sounds to amplify everything during the mixing and editing process of your record. Mm-hmm. So does that kind of make sense, Cody?
Yeah, I think so. And maybe, yeah. Oh, by the way, Patrick, your mic's doing that thing, so you might want to close that video.
Oh.
And so maybe technical, I forget what term he used. Maybe technical isn't the right word in like the skill of the guitarist, but more like perfect timings and rhythms, and it doesn't sound sloppy and
it's not as live. Yeah,
and maybe that's just the progression of music into the digital age.
Definitely, for sure.
Yeah, and I understand now. Yeah, go ahead, finish.
That kind of like machine gun style guitar does not appeal to me at all, and that didn't really seem to exist until the 90s, maybe.
That's what I thought too, Cody. That's totally incorrect. They were doing that stuff in the early 80s.
Okay,
that's what
80s.
I learned from Metallica. Like, it's not necessarily the same, but there was Metallica, metal. Iron Maiden, Motorhead did those types of things.
Yes, yeah,
maybe not to that extreme.
But. Yeah, and from what I've heard, like I've never really liked like Iron Maiden or Anthrax or like I don't know, like all these like thrash metal bands.
Yeah,
right. But so, you do know a lot of Metallica songs, though.
Yeah, sure.
I think Metallica is one of the finest the most well-constructed bridges of all time between rock music and metal music.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say I definitely don't even know if I consider Metallica to be overall a metal band. I do think I would consider them to be a metal band.
See now, but that's.
But
how
the
do you
thing
apply that to the once a metal band, always a metal band idea?
Well, that's true. But to me, I don't think, and we've talked about this, Cody, a lot in our Metallica videos, Metallica has never had an intense screaming vocal in any song they've ever made.
Correct.
It's never existed. Metallica has only clean vocals in all of their music from throughout their entire catalog. And so to me, again, you don't have to have screaming vocals to make something metal, but I do feel like screaming intense vocals are one of the core tenets of what makes something metal. But not everything, you know.
That makes sense.
But some of the bands,
I think it's one of those things where it's like if you take a bunch of different elements of metal, like ingredients, and then give them a certain score weight, where it's like guitar solo, you get 8 points for guitar solo, you get 6 points for screaming vocals, you get 10 points for heavy riffs. And
What about having metal in the band name?
Big numbers.
Big points there.
Big numbers.
we could have a whole we could do a whole thing on just metal band names.
Oh yeah, you could bring up a spreadsheet. We could just spend
Cattle
all day categorizing.
decapitation.
And your
for a cowboy.
comment about it being easier to make metal sound good now makes more sense after that explanation. Because in my head,
good.
I was imagining recording metal in like a guitar, bass, drum, vocal kind of way and mixing it and then applying that to something even heavier with even more instrumentation and doing it in a more traditional style. And it's like, that's, mixing complex metal with a lot of instruments and having it sound good is like one of the hardest things that you could do as a producer. But the way that you explained it is like, okay, that makes more sense.
Yes, because like up until the probably late 90s, well, maybe I should say it like this. Since the late 90s, early 2000s, when I was getting into metal, and then when I was in college in 2005, that's when the ability for one person like me to sit down with the guitar and make an entire metal song on my laptop, that's when that became a thing that was possible. And then that became easier and easier and easier. Whereas before that, early 90s and before that, you had to have someone in there playing the drums. You had to have a bass player. You had to have a guitar player, another guitar player, vocalist. Since that time, now it is a lot of metal records you're hearing nowadays probably don't have any real person that ever sat down and played any drums. Ever. It's just programmed drum beats. Now, that's not true of everything, and there are some phenomenal metal drummers. My favorite metal drummer of all time is named Morten Toft Hansen, and he's this 12-foot tall, enormous dude who happens to be the drummer for Raunchy. So we're going to hear a lot of him when we do the Raunchy videos, and he's my favorite drummer because I believe his drum parts matter more than any other metal band I've ever heard. In terms of how the song feels and everything is all based on the drums. And so we'll get into that and talk about that more when we do those Raunchy reactions. But yeah, it's the idea that you can cheat so much now to make and I call it cheating, and I really don't even mean it in a negative way. It's the way I make music, and it's the way a lot of great albums are made. But it's very common nowadays to go find a metal band on Spotify and click on the picture of the person, and it's one dude of the band, and it's one dude, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, but that just tells you how much easier it is for metal to be made nowadays. And there are styles of music now that are popular, like there are bands that just do breakdowns the entire song. Like the whole song is just slow, intense chugging with just totally inaudible or unrecognizable vocals over the top of it. Something like that would have never been done in like the 80s or the 90s because you had to have these other people in the band and everyone wanted to have fun when they were playing. Not necessarily that there aren't bands that do that kind of like crazy extreme stuff or like noisy things and all this stuff. That stuff's kind of always existed, but it's just with technology now you can go lower. You can make things more extreme, and because of that, it kind of widened the bucket of people for people to throw their own stuff into the bucket, if that makes sense. So
I think it was really interesting the way he put that Lorna Shore clip in right after that Sabbath clip, because just hearing the difference in low end made every single bit of difference for how heavy those two songs sounded compared to each other.
And you could have never gotten low frequencies like that back in the day. Nothing is mixed that way from that time period. Nothing.
Well, none of that. Vinyl can't produce low end frequencies like that.
Yeah.
Not like that. No. And people are going to crawl all over us and stuff, but definitely vinyl from back in the day couldn't do that. So
vinyl's bad.
Plus, you had to think about all the noise cancellation that had to be done to every single track that as you were recording it and all that stuff, and tape stuff, everything recording to tape.
You have to account for the people with the crappy record players, that
right? And see,
the needle's just going to jump out if you go.
That's why
extreme.
Some of that earlier stuff is so impressive, because of the limitations on the technology and the limitations of all that. And so that's why when you do talk about metal in general, you have to talk about Black Sabbath and all those bands that did kind of start things and kick things off, because though it took those people, Tony Iommi losing the tip of his finger and being forced to tune his guitar down because he literally couldn't play with his finger anymore. It hurt too bad. And so like you have those things happen that then eventually lead to what we would consider to be metal today, and the definition of metal changes over the decades too.
When did the first band, because you got all these progenitors of metal that started in like the late 60s, early 70s, but when was the first, like, is that what he was talking about with the tritone, or like when was the first band to go jung 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 jung? Because that seemed to be like the kind of baseline of everything that he played there, except for the Black Sabbath stuff.
Right. I think Motorhead was one of. This is not my area of expertise at all, and I don't think it's Chris's really either. But if there's anything
I have learned about questions like this, whatever the answer feels like it is, it was probably 10 years before that.
Yeah, sure. Right, exactly. But I was going to say Motorhead as an example, because I think Motorhead existed before Metallica, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, those bands. And Motorhead was doing stuff like that. But also you have to think about stuff like Joan Jett, right? And the right? Donna, right? That's a heavy riff,
Yeah. I wonder what that riff would sound like if it was like a minor version of that, if it's not currently.
I'm pretty sure that's minor. And actually, that is a cover song. That's one of my favorite examples of a cover song most people don't know. The original song was recorded by a band called The Arrows, like 5 years before that, and it is still the same exact song, but it sounds completely different, and it's a male vocalist. But there were bands that were doing things like that. I think to me, this might answer your question. There is a band called Death, Cody, that started, I believe, in the early 80s, right around the same time as Metallica and stuff.
He played a clip from a band.
He did.
Right. I think
a real bad one.
I think they are considered the first like extreme metal band.
Okay.
I love that their name is Death. I really appreciate the appropriateness of that.
I could. People have joked about us reacting to them here on the channel because they think we would all hate it. I think Chris
would hate it.
Thinks they're okay, but I don't think that I would like it very much either. But what he played there didn't sound terrible.
I don't know. That sounds like the kind of thing I would listen to for archival purposes only, as I like to say about old stuff sometimes.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Just educational.
And that goes into personal thing too, because like we were saying before, like I like metal, extreme metal, like heavy metal, screaming metal vocals. I love extreme, like heavy metal vocals that are different styles. So all my favorite bands have vocalists that can do both low, like more grunty grunts, and higher pitched screams as well. And then what you do is you layer those two things on top of each other, and you have like unlimited possibilities with how heavy the vocals can sound. And then you have to be a good singer on top of that in order to fit into my realm of what I like in terms about metal. And so a band like Death, I don't think they ever sung. So I think it was just that dude screaming the whole time. But in terms of like Motorhead was like the bridge kind of between the punk and the rock. And then I believe they made it just a little bit more. And that's where you kind of bridge into the metal. Most people don't really mention Motorhead that much when you're talking about classic metal stuff. Mostly it's Metallica, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, stuff like that. And those bands all started in the early 90s, maybe late 70s, early 90s. So that's probably,
80s?
I'm sorry, yes, 80s. I'm sorry, 80s.
Judas Priest started in 1969.
Yes, they were a different kind of music for a long time,
Were they?
I think. Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. But I mean, we'd have to look into. Again,
And those are all British bands, is that right?
Metallica's not.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But I think
Megadeth is not.
Their early days, they said they were initially influenced by the wave of British thrash, like the 70s British thrash scene.
Yeah,
So
is that
makes
where
sense.
that? Yeah, it looks like there was
Yes.
like a British metal wave.
Well,
in
and
the early
we
80s.
also need
This
to
is
mention.
where other Chris, I think, would be really great.
Yeah,
for.
we also have to mention Deep Purple here because Deep Purple is like the slow, chuggy blues, like jump, 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 jump.
Yeah.
Like that is what Deep Purple. I mean, right? That is where a lot of that probably chuggy chug stuff comes from. But yeah, again, we are not the people to really talk about the origins of a lot of this stuff. We just know our stuff and then beyond. Okay, so we are going to move on and listen to another video here. We just had a bit of a conversation. I don't know how much of that I'll leave in and how much I won't. But now we kind of want to focus. And again, this is just the beginning of this conversation. We could do probably 40 more videos like this talking about different specific aspects. And we didn't even break down for Cody, like, do you want to, Chris, real quick, do you have any specific genres of metal that you particularly like?
Me?
Yeah, and I know you're not like a genre guy, so you don't really like I know
I
you
like things.
you like metalcore
usually-
a lot more than I
Yeah, I was
do.
gonna say I usually like stuff with core in it, metalcore,
Right.
mathcore, post-core,
Nintendo core,
Yep,
parkour,
Corium.
Hardcore.
parkour.
What is raunchy?
Raunchy would be melodic death metal,
Okay.
Filth.
and honestly, the filthcore, reactcore. It's a whole. It's
That's
just
the
genre
channel.
based on. I will say one thing I want to throw out to everybody: watching behind the scenes recordings of metal albums is one of the things that got me into heavier music in the first place. So I just want to throw out to everybody, if you are someone that's watching this because you're like kind of curious about metal, or you don't like any of the super heavy stuff, or you're like Cody and you're just not really you don't think of metal in a positive vibe really in terms of what you personally care for and your tastes. I cannot recommend watching behind the scenes metal stuff because it's just, there's something so, like one of my favorite things to watch ever is the documentary that Roadrunner Records, which Cody, have you heard of Roadrunner Records?
Nope.
Roadrunner Records, one of the most famous and iconic American metal record labels. Very, very, very famous bands on this label. I'm not going to go into it because I'll probably miss the big ones. But they did a 25th anniversary project where they hired 5 different leaders of their bands. Like, for example, Joey Jordison from Slipknot was one of them. Matt Heafy from Trivium was one of them. Rob, what's his name? The guy from Machine Head, who's the vocalist and guitar player. But anyway, 5 guys who are sort of the leads of their bands, but who are also good in the studio and know how to like record, and they're good musicians. They hired these 5 guys to go into the studio and write songs with anyone from any of the bands on any of the Roadrunner Records label that they wanted. So it's like this, like the Matt Heafy ones are sort of my favorite ones on there. So Matt Heafy is a guy who plays guitar and sings for a band called Trivium. He's good at playing guitar and singing. So he had a drummer from another famous band come in to do the drums, and he had a bass player from another famous band come in. And so there's a documentary they made about this that is one of my favorite things ever. And it's just seeing all of these dudes in the studio, some of them meeting for the first time. Every person is just like the sweetest, nicest dude. And then they go in the studio and they're just like, like, you know, it's so funny. And one guy's even like, I kissed my mother with this mouth. Like it's very funny. You know what I mean? Like it's very funny.
Yeah, those guys are
and
great.
it really grounds all of the people. And from a production standpoint, it's fascinating to see everything being done. But I cannot recommend stuff like that enough. And then another thing that I want to shout out, that's something that's really new. The first season came out last year and the second season came out this year. There's a YouTube, there's a lot of famous metal YouTube guys, but one of the most famous ones is a guy named Jared Dines, and his YouTube channel has been around for over, I think, 15 years at this point, a long time, maybe 12 years. But not as long as ours, which has been around for 17 years. So, but he has become so massive that what he did last year was he created a reality show, and he tried to produce it like a really big reality show, and it looks fantastic, but it's called Musician Mansion. And what he did was he took famous metal.
Should have called it Musantion.
You'll have to write to him and tell him the season 3
No one
of the
listens
Musantion.
to me. Yeah,
But
Musantion.
what that is it's famous famous YouTube music stars who like guy who plays the guitar, guy who sings, guy who, girl who plays the guitar, girl who's a drummer, whatever. They brought like, I don't know how many people it was, like 20 people or whatever, to this mansion, and then they separated them into 3 people and created 3 bands. And then over the course of a week, went through these challenges. They had to like write a song, record a song, come up with a name for their band, all this stuff. It really shows behind the scenes. It shows how cool these people are. It shows their interesting musicianship. And at the end of the day, it's meant to be just like entertainment, like popcorn entertainment, but it's really fun. And something like this has not existed in the metal community up to this point. It's a very accessible, super entertaining show that is made that I believe anybody could really appreciate, but all the music is like hardcore metal music. And so it really is really, really cool. And I wish more people would watch it. It's insanely popular. But season 2 just came out this year. So I want to direct.
I wish even more people would watch it.
I do. I wish more people would watch it. I wish it would get picked up by a network and be played on
But not
TV.
too many, because then we
that
hate
good.
it, right?
Then it wouldn't be metal anymore. Then it'd be too poppy. Okay, so this next video we're going to watch here, I believe, is a bit more focused on guitar. I only watched the first like 2 minutes of this or so, and I was like, this sounds pretty cool. We'll watch this and react to it on the channel. And we'll see, again, like Chris was saying earlier, in terms of what I leave in the video, I'm not too sure. We'll see how much we talk about it, and then we'll see what we talk about it after the fact and what we can, some conversations that can come from it. So this is a channel, Pete Cottrell. Never heard of this guy before. He seems vaguely familiar, so I've probably seen maybe some of his shorts or something on YouTube. But this is his video, What Makes Heavy Heavy. You guys got it pulled up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, we're going to start it in 3, 2, 1.
So, what makes heavy heavy? This is a question that has fascinated me for many, many years now, because everyone has their own definition of what heavy music is to them. It's an inherently personal thing, and everyone defines it differently. A piece of music that is heavy to me, you may not think is heavy at all. Metallica, Black Sabbath, Slipknot, Deftones, Meshuggah, Gojira, Napalm Death, Emperor, all considered to be heavy bands, some of the biggest in music history.
People consider them.
They all sound so different. So, what is it that triggers this emotional response within us? The one that says, this is really heavy, and I like it. Now, I asked you guys on social media what you think about this, and I'm going to use some of the responses that you gave me to make a riff and then evolve it into the heaviest riff possible, in theory. And at the end of the video, I'd like you guys to tell me which version of the riff you think is the heaviest. Let's start with the obvious things, like distortion.
Wow, okay, that's got really loud.
That's the point, man.
Yeah, it is.
I'm here for this new Metallica song.
So he's in drop C. You can tell he's doing 3-chord, I think drop C.
So what you just heard is going to be our starting riff, the one that we're hopefully going to evolve into something much, much heavier. It almost goes without saying that a fat, distorted guitar riff backed up by an equally gritty bass is the foundation of something heavy. Something that sounds like this is probably going to sound heavier than something like this.
That's no distortion. Very funny.
You also mentioned
Country.
things like dissonance, tritones, and minor tonalities as things you associate with heavy. Now, for anyone without any music theory knowledge, dissonance and tritones kind of make a riff sound uneasy or evil, whereas minor keys and scales generally make a riff sound sad. So a riff with a minor tonality should naturally sound heavier than a riff with a major tonality. Check out what happens to the riff when I flip it between major and minor.
Just a few note changes, completely different.
Minor's better.
I agree.
Okay, so moving beyond the obvious. Some of
Could
you
you
said
tell a
that
difference there, Cody?
attitude makes riff sound heavy.
I
And
wouldn't have
agree.
said
What's
that the
best
difference
way to
was
convey
minor versus
attitude
major
in a
and
heavy
how I
riff?
knew that.
Okay.
It just sounded like he was playing slightly
So,
different
like
notes.
my buddy Hunter here
Okay.
says,
Well, he was playing slightly different notes.
Right, yeah, but-
downpicking
okay.
every single note.
Wait, so,
even when you
hold
don't
on, let me
need to.
pause it for just 1 sec. Sorry. Okay, we'll probably have to leave this in the video. So the idea with a lot of metal and what they're talking about tritones and all this stuff is when you have something, when any major key, right? So take the key of C major. It's the most easy one for everyone to understand. C major is C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, right? That's a full, those are all the pure tones. Whatever. I'm not going to play them on the play them on the scarf. This is a scarf, by the way, for anybody that's curious. It's just a scarf. So
If only it wasn't backwards.
yeah, well, whatever. I could do it, but this is a C, and so it's literally just the white notes: C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, right? And so to make it into a minor key like C minor. I have to do music theory. Fat cows. There was two minors, so it'd be two flats. Sorry, I'm not good at music theory, but like,
Well, especially not on a scarf that's 10 feet away. Like, that's not working out
Right,
anyway from a video perspective.
to make something minor, you flat, right? And in metal, it's very common to flat the fourth and the fifth, especially fifth is always flat. But you flat certain things, so you just take and move them a half tone down, and what that does is it creates more dissonance. It just makes things sound more evil and stuff. So when he was
dark,
when he
all the
was
good
changing
words.
from minor to major, what he was playing when he was playing major, every note fit the scale perfectly for his major scale. And then when he switched it to minor, he just flatted some of the notes that go within that, and there's all these mathematical rules that are reasons for that. And that's, so he is literally just playing a few notes differently. And depending on the key, like I said, in the key of C, there's two flats. In the key of like F, there's a ton or one, or whatever. Like it depends on the mathematical parts.
So
of it.
that was in the same key, but just minor versus major.
I don't know if it was the same key. He just said minor and major.
Okay.
Because the thing is, the key of C major has all the exact same notes as the key of A minor.
Okay.
Except what?
No, the same notes. The key of
So what do
C
you-
major has the same exact notes as the key of A minor.
Does it just depend on
So
how you
that
use it?
why
or is it just
does
two labels?
Why does it
does
sound
one of them-
different? Because
why
of
does
the
it well, that I wouldn't have said it sounds different. I would have said, why can there be two if they're the same? But
right? For every major key, there is the exact same amount of notes in a minor key, but whatever. This is getting too complicated. But basically, what it's because of the intervals between notes, right? So a C, a fifth is the most common interval, right? So a C to a G, right? C to G is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 tones. Every half step is one tone. And there's 12 possible tones in every single key. However, there's 8 full notes, but you can play 12 possible tones. When you move in, so the difference between a C and a fifth is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 tones. But the difference between A and its relative fifth is F. Yeah, A and F. I think A, C, E. No, it'd be E. No. Yeah, A to E. Yeah, A to E. Sorry, I'm going too far. I'm going to seventh. Well, whatever. It's a different number of steps.
I've lost the plot.
It's a different number of steps because of the way the keyboard works, right? There is not a black key between every one. That would make it the same amount of tones between every fifth of every different key.
see.
But because you're moving down 3 whole notes, it's a different amount of tones that can be between it. So you're actually having a minor sound, even though it's literally the same 2 notes you could play in a chord in a C major song.
okay.
Okay, sorry. Let's go back to the video. Probably cut all that junk out. Okay, I'm at 241.
Yep.
Yep.
In 3, 2, 1.
Hetfield and John Brown are well known for doing this, but they don't just do this for show. It actually sounds more aggressive. Check it out.
Yeah, he's talking about down picking, which is moving your pick down instead of down and up like a strum.
Oh.
And James Hetfield is the most famous down picking rhythm guitarist from Metallica.
Now, I've already done a video on this recently, but down-tuning the riff changes things dramatically. And lots of you mentioned this too, that somehow there's just something about lowering the pitch of a riff that makes it sound more aggressive. George says, down-tuning technically has nothing to do with how heavy a riff sounds, but I'll be damned if drop A chugging doesn't hit me differently than standard.
I like the refrain, the part where it goes. That sounds better this way for sure.
Yeah.
Something that pairs very well with downtuning is a slower tempo. Lots of you pointed out that a fast riff doesn't necessarily equal heavy, with many of you saying the opposite in fact. Henning says, for me, heaviness comes from a weighty rhythm with a fat, half-time slow riff on it. So let's slow things down a bit, and while we're at it, let's add in some gratuitous chugging, because loads of you said that as well.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Now that's what it's supposed to sound like.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. He added some triplets in there. Da-da-dum.
So he's doing a mix of strumming and picking here, is that right?
Not necessarily
mostly-
ever strumming, but it's just because he's only ever really focusing on.
Something else that you kept
kind of.
mentioning was simplicity
Basically, yeah.
and how it can affect the perceived heaviness of a riff. Patrick says, heavy should be
Hey.
simple. I think a
you.
simple
That's
riff
not
makes
me.
a song
That's not
sound
me.
huge. And I agree with this completely. I think some of the heaviest riffs in the world are also some of the simplest.
Sad but true. Oh yeah. Right, so now it's a bit more rhythmic and less technical too.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. It's so great because it's going from like, oh, this is like Soilwork's first album to Soilwork's 7th album. You know? This is it later in Flames.
Yeah, my metal band just
Simplicity
gained
also
25
ties
years
in
of age.
very nicely with something else that loads of you guys mentioned too. Groove. Now, groove is quite hard to describe, but if
Yeah.
you break it down, groove is kind of like a rhythm that you feel. It's the cool bit of the riff that
Yep,
makes you
1,000,000%.
smile ear to ear and bob your head up and down.
This is
and
gonna
turn
be
it up
good.
and listen to it over and over and over again.
Oh yeah.
So he sped it back up a lot.
The group here.
Yes. But they're literally just playing when he hits the low E string,
Yeah.
which is a majority of metal anyway.
So this is just the melodic progression of the notes he's playing and how
it's-
good it sounds?
No, it's rhythmic progression. He
Rhythmic
changed
progression.
he changed the rhythm of it, but kept the notes
A
all
more
the same.
advanced form
Oh,
of
okay.
groove is syncopation, and syncopation is basically a form of rhythmic displacement. Most notes in a riff or
This is
song
gonna turn it
usually
into
fall
Meshuggah
on the
or
beat,
some
but
kind of
with
math.
syncopation,
I was gonna say, is
some
this
of
about
those
to turn
notes
into a
are
periphery
offset
song?
and no
Yes,
longer line
yes.
up with where we would expect them. This
There's a
can create
band we need to
some
do more
really,
of, or
really
any of.
cool and interesting new rhythms, and if it's used correctly, it can sort of become like an advanced form of groove. So if we use this in combination with notes that are already on the beat, things can get very interesting. Let's
Yeah,
see what happens
weird
when
stuff.
we apply it to the riff.
It didn't go periphery, but I like it.
Yeah, I like it too. It's just a little bit more technical, really. He's not
Yeah.
doing anything rhythmically different, really. He went back to the simple, slow part again as well.
Yeah, syncopation, I don't really know. I don't understand the definition.
It's
of.
literally just playing like two things that shouldn't work together as well at the same time, and then
So,
they all
what
end at
makes
the same
heavy
point.
heavy? Well, lots of things, it seems. Let me know what you think makes heavy heavy, and which version of the riff you thought was the heaviest in the comments below. One last thing to mention, for lots of you, heavy seems to be associated with production more than anything else. And something that kept popping up in your responses was the importance of a good, well-balanced mix. And I agree, but for this video, I wanted to focus more on the riff, so I thought I'd mention it here at the end instead. Hopefully, my mediocre
Also known as I can't produce
enough. All right, I'll do
Oh no, it sounded pretty good to me. If I had an album that
agree.
sounded like that, I'd be like, fine. And that was the simplest thing in the whole world. So, I think in there he didn't say this, but I'm guessing every one of those riffs was after he played it, he added like a fake bass thing based on just what he played on the guitar back to it, because that was not just guitar that we were hearing.
I think the slower tempo,
Yeah.
which is coincidentally the most replayed part of this video, so I think most people agree with that.
There you go.
When he hit slower tempo at 408, that was when it's like, okay, this is the best version of this riff.
So Cody, how did you feel about that? Like when I started to get into heavier music, for me, seeing people play it helped a lot.
Yeah. A lot of them I was kind of like, well, this just kind of sounds the same.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Or this sounds like what we were two riffs ago or whatever. He kind of lost me with the syncopation stuff, although your definition kind of makes sense, I guess. At least academically I can understand it, but I don't know if I could point it out.
I couldn't have figured out how to differentiate it from the previous one, and like, what is the pattern that I'm seeing is different from what he just did to create a definition of syncopated for this. That's the part I got lost on too, but
yeah, that's definitely the most complicated thing to try to explain that he did, and I'm not even sure I understand it fully. But yeah, I think it was mostly just talking about like what he did there that I noticed was he just his accent notes were placed in a different place that was probably less obvious to put them. So but the thing is, he went back to the slower version when he was doing the faster version, the riff before that. So I think that's kind of what threw me off. The tempo changed again, as opposed to just where he was placing the notes. So I think it was a lot less obvious because of that. But still a really cool video, and exactly what I wanted it to be, focusing more on the guitar. So now the next video we're going to watch is the one I've been most excited for you both to see. This is
I'm looking forward to it.
one guitar riff, 10 drum beats by one of my all-time favorite YouTube creators, 66 Seamus or 66 Samus. I think it's Seamus.
I would say Samus. I mean, yeah, I guess it's
66 Samus. I've never heard him say his name. But I watch this guy all the time. He is one of my favorite people on YouTube. He is so funny, but also an incredible drummer. He does mostly all drumming stuff. I'd never seen him play the guitar until this video, and he sat down and played the guitar, and I was like, well, you son of a bee, you're a way better guitar player than I'll ever be, and I knew you were like God tier drummer. So, okay.
Yeah, this is the kind of stuff that I really love. Like, if I were to be in a metal band or an instrumentalist or good at anything, it would be drums. That would be my preferred thing of all of the options. That's the one I care about the most. And I really love how much drum beats can just completely change just how a song feels. This is going to be
we didn't talk about this earlier because we talked about so many things, but one of the things I was going to ask you, Chris, was what do you think is the most important part of metal that would define it as metal? And I was going to have us inevitably have the conversation of guitars versus drums, which is more important, because I could argue, I do think it's guitar at the end of the day. However, I do think a lot of guitar riffs could exist in rock songs, but you cannot have certain drum beats in rock songs and still have them be called a rock song. That's not to say that because a song has double bass in it, it's a metal song, but that would be one of the defining factors for me, is if it's got double bass in it, it's probably a metal song.
I think because Lars's drum parts are usually as simple as they are, there's just so little, like, it's very clear that the drums are keeping the song together, but they're not a focus of how they write their music. I think that's a good argument for guitar being a more important element.
Probably depends on the band.
I think in Metallica's case, yes. But I think, for sure. That's one of the things about Metallica that maybe is not super, one of the reasons I don't necessarily care for them as much as certain other bands, because I think the drums could be a little bit more important. Though I like what Lars is playing. It's the simplicity of what he's playing that I enjoy. So,
Yeah, and I feel like that based on who they are as a band and like what their music is like, I feel like it's kind of novel that his drum parts are so simple for being effectively like one of the inventors of metal.
Yeah, for sure. And he played more complex stuff way at the beginning. If you listen to Ride the Lightning and Master of Puppets, it's significantly different than Load and Reload, but the guitar riffs are just as different as the drums are. I just think you and I kind of prefer the slower, more plodding feel of that stuff. Plus, it's just mixed way better. But
drums are the instrument I notice the least in music.
Wow. So. It's the first thing I listen to.
So maybe this will be enlightening. I don't know.
I think you'll find this to be very fascinating for sure.
Yeah. So Cody, for this, now for me, a lot of my perspective of a lot of this comes from recording several metal albums with a pretty awesome metal band, Primal Waters, and like sitting there with them while we're recording and stuff and being like, well, maybe you could try to play the drum part like this instead of this, or just like editing the drums after the fact, editing the guitars after the fact, seeing how everything works together to make the rhythm part of it is really, really, really fascinating. Really fascinating. And so my personal experience is editing and recording metal really affect the way I see the way that metal is put together. And obviously that's something that I can't share with anybody. That's just a personal experience I had. So for Cody, for this, I would say, just try to, it's not necessarily about noticing what he's doing different, but just like how it feels different.
Yeah.
So, okay. This is 6'6" Samus with his 1 guitar riff, 10 drum beats. In 3, 2, 1.
Well, hey there, Bachabs. Today I thought it would be fun to do a little experiment. Let's record a riff on the guitar and then try playing 10 different drum beats over it. We'll see which one we like the best. Yeah. Figured this would be fun since it's always a pain in the butt when you're trying to compare what drum beats you should play over a riff or anything like that. So let's hop over to my desk.
Oh,
I can't believe
he would love that
get to
you
play
said
guitar right now. Wow, this is like a rarity for me these days. Got my trusty Avril Vagine signature. Let's write a riff. Tempo 222.
Sounds like
okay. Let's get our guitar tone real quick. I'm going to use Easy Mix for this, and we'll use one of Wes Hauck's presets.
This guy's hilarious.
All right, let's riff it up, man. Excellent. Okay, excellent show, everyone. So let's quickly put some bass on it. And I mean quickly, I don't even have to pick up my bass. Remember, Easy Bass has an audio tracker, so I could just drag the guitar file right into here. It'll make the bass line for us. You like? And let's see what it gave us. That's perfect.
Legit. What a weird tempo that he's chosen. Or time signature, I guess.
Yeah.
There you have it. Oh, you're all right. I think we're ready to go back to the drums now. Okay.
Which I suppose
what drum beat
is
should
like,
we try
well, I guess
first,
he's
huh?
a drummer.
Maybe
so.
just a plain old rock beat to get things started.
I like it better now.
Yep.
You know what? That actually sounded and felt pretty good. To me, anyways. And in case anyone is wondering, I'm using the Troublemaker kit from Duality 2 on Easy Drummer. It's great! All right, next let's try a faster rock beat. I guess we'll call this Double Time from the first one. Oh, yeah, that one felt pretty damn good to him, Cody. Why don't we slow it down a bit now and try a Lamb of God style breakdown? Well, that was pretty cool.
If you want me to pause it,
I
I'll let
especially
me know.
liked how that sounded with the ride cymbal. Where could we go from here, huh? Even
A good ride cymbal. This is not.
I think that one was my least favorite so far. Didn't really match with the riff, in my opinion. Why don't we speed things back up and go back to the rock beat, but this time add some double bass.
Now it's the beginning of the song.
Yeah. 1,000,000% yes.
Yeah, interesting.
That was pretty nice. Before we start getting into the even faster beats, why don't we try a little tribal tom tona?
I like the style better, but with a different riff, probably.
You're right. Yeah, and
That hi-hat.
I don't care for this really at all.
Yeah.
It's like a transitional
Okay, that
drum
was pretty
beat.
cool too. I liked that. How about the punk beat next? Also known as the Slayer beat.
Twice as fast snare drum hits.
Now we're starting to heat things up a bit, Boffy. We tried 8th note double bass over the rock beat. Now let's try 16th note double bass over the double time beat.
Oh, jeez.
How do I feel about this?
Makes
Maybe
the whole thing feel
Kick
faster.
dropped.
That was pretty
the
sick
kick drop
too,
to me
man.
makes
the
it
riff
That kind of
feel
reminded me of
slow.
Shadows Fall or All That Remains. What do you think? Should we finally try a blast beat? Yeah. Let's try the hammer blast followed by a bomb blast.
I like that more than the previous one.
And finally, let's finish her off with the traditional blast. Or as the noobs these days like to say, hey, your snare drum isn't in time with your bass drum. It's behind. You're dragging.
Now this is just thrashy to me. This is just thrash.
He mentioned All That Remains
Yeah.
for the previous one. I think this sounds more like them even. Maybe, or
sure.
Unearthed.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of this one.
Okay.
It's not
You know
my
what?
favorite.
I know that was 10, but let's do one more, because you can also do combinations. Plus, you know I need to do 11 anyways, right? Because that's half of 20.
What is wrong with this man?
Nothing. He's great.
What's with the holes in that cymbal?
That just gives it a different sound.
If I had to guess, as a splash cymbal, it probably causes it to resonate for a
All
shorter
right,
time.
well, that was fun. Which beat was your favorite? Also, let me know in the comments which beats I forgot to play, because I'm sure I forgot some, right? Other than that, thank you all so much for watching. You guys are the best. Sex.
I love that guy. He is so awesome.
I dig them.
So
I guess a lot of that I was thinking, okay, this just makes it feel faster or slower. And I get that, okay, especially when he started hitting the tom drums, that was like, okay, this sounds completely different and weird. But it's like, I don't know how to define one of those as like, these are metal drums versus these are just like fast rock and roll drums.
well, this is not for him. None of this was about metal. This is
Yeah.
just about what drum beats you can play over it. You know.
Sure.
It's not my favorite example of this exercise. I feel like it was a little bit too constrained by the way that he made that riff. Like you could do a slower or a simpler riff, and I think have more freedom for even more styles that fit what he was doing. potentially.
I mean,
Well,
I felt
he
like
was-
when he was like not going faster than the riff and not going slower than the riff, it felt right to me. And I know you don't have to do it like that, but like, I don't know, it makes the music feel faster, slower.
See, to me, the point of this is to show how the drums can make it just feel different. I mean, I really do think that the riff never changed tempo, but some of them felt faster. You know, what he was playing on the drums made the song feel faster, and that's a powerful thing.
Oh yeah.
There's a couple of different ones where it was like, I like this song, I don't like this song. And it was
interesting.
based entirely off,
Yeah,
or
sure.
at least it would be like, I like where this is going. You know, if I'm listening to a new metal band or something as like NEW, not NU, it would be like, okay, I like where this is at. And it's like, oh, this might head somewhere I don't like. You can expect a sung vocal versus a screamed vocal depending on which of those drum patterns you used.
Yeah.
Well, and the interesting to think about here is how the song is crafted, because in the metal world, probably a vast majority of what you're hearing was all these guitar riffs put together. And then the guitarist goes to practice and they go over the riffs with everybody else in the band, especially the drummer. And then they're like, okay, what kind of beat should go over this? And what they choose is how the song feels. You know, to me, that illustrates that you can have a guitar riff and then the drums are what dictate the way it feels. And so now we only listen to, 8 bars of a guitar riff and then 8 bars repeated, with the string open with the guitar riff. So like in a metal song, probably every single part, not everything, but like everything he played could be incorporated into a metal song that had that riff as the main riff. You know what I mean? Like you wouldn't.
Some of them just felt like different parts of the same song.
Exactly.
Like you mentioned the part that sounded like the start of the song.
Right. For sure. And so keep that in mind when you hear a song and think to yourself, why did they choose this drum beat? It's not that there's a correct drum beat. It's there's a correct drum beat, I suppose, for the feel that they're going for. And from what I've observed, a lot of the time, the feel is not necessarily what the guitar player was intending, but it's what the drummer wanted to play, and it's what everyone else is vibing with, and they're like, okay, I guess that's how the song feels now. Or the drummer will be like, that's too fast, slow it down. And then the guitar player plays it slower, and that's how metal songs are built. But it's the choosing of the initial what to play that is the thing that fascinates me the most. Is like, what if you're a certain type of a band, you would never play that first one he did, that rock drum beat. You would never do that because your fans would be like, well, you sold out. You sold out. There's no drum. There's no double kick in the riff bass, in the drum bass. So it's like, certain things would be dictated by the genre or style you're trying to go for. But if you don't have any limitations like that, like when we listen to Raunchy, there will be no limitations. And so they can have all of that in one song. And it's going to be fun to keep that in mind. That's just one tiny element to keep in mind when we were listening to anything in the future. Like, why did they choose this specific thing? And when you hear that, an example of what different drums over it can make it sound like, because then you think too, if you're adding a keyboard part over the top of it, are they just holding the keyboards out? Is it doubling what the guitar is doing? Is it a solo? What the drums are doing is dictating how everything else is fitting into the puzzle, and it's such an important thing to me. Yeah. Honestly, like I do think it's more important than the guitar.
Yep.
Okay, so with
Patrick, kill your video if you're gonna keep talking.
What do you mean?
Your YouTube, because your mic is doing that thing.
Oh.
Whenever you have a video up.
Is this a little better now? Check.
So far, yep.
Check. Okay.
It went away immediately.
Okay. Well, I'll just make sure I don't talk too much during the videos, unless whatever. But if it's not so bad, and you can still understand it. It's fine.
That's fine.
Easy to understand.
Okay.
Never been a problem.
Okay. So since you said that, Chris, let's do one more video then. The next one, how drums can drastically affect a riff. I think this is going to be a slower riff. So that might do what you were kind of thinking about doing. Though I'm not sure. I did not watch. I just watched the beginning of this. So this channel is The Art of Guitar. This is the channel that I watched this guy sort of do a vlog style video going to both of the Metallica shows both days. And friend of the channel, I guess, fan of the channel, Art of Guitar, went and watched a bit of our reaction to his video. And he didn't have any problem with it. so
that's amazing. That's nice.
Yes, and I would say too that guy we just reacted to, 66 Samus, he does reaction videos of drummers doing cool drum stuff on YouTube all the time. So like there is a bit of precedence for some of this, I guess. But
sure, totally.
But okay, so let's just go ahead and watch this and see how you guys feel. I think this is essentially the same sort of a thing, but maybe less heavy. So. All right, in 3, 2, 1. So here he's imitating different styles.
Yeah.
That really brings a lot of Metallica to this.
I know, doesn't it?
It really does. Man, that was something.
Now, doesn't it sound like Rush all of a sudden?
Yeah, it does. Wow.
Yeah, I like this way of doing it better. It gives it more to connect to in the real world.
Yeah.
This is a really well-crafted video. Well chosen. Wow, dude. Especially being familiar with all of these bands, except for the first one, it's like, this is exactly what it is. That's Megadeth. Ugh, even the sloppiness at the end. Interesting choice.
Yeah, it just sounds like he's playing Rosanna.
Yeah, which is my favorite Toto song. This sounds a million times better than any Led Zeppelin song.
Patrick's
just
favorite
couldn't
metal
get-
band.
Yeah.
Don't just besmirch metal by calling Led Zeppelin metal.
Some people would say John Bonham's a good drummer.
Go Meg White.
Don't people say
Man, oh,
Meg
man.
White is terrible?
Yeah,
Okay.
they're
They're
wrong.
just mad that there's a girl on a drum
Yeah,
kit.
they're wrong. Totally.
Okay. I know. I don't know.
Yeah,
They're wrong about Lars being bad too, but it's a
Yeah.
problem. Man, I really do not like Primus.
I think Primus is fun.
And it's crazy how good this video is, man.
good. I'm glad. Wow.
It's just it is doing
Yeah,
exactly what it says on every single one of these. It's like, yep, that's Tool.
It's really, it's crazy how he can hit a drum and make it sound like a band.
Right. It does.
When he's hitting the
Everything's
same drum in this one, and it sounds different.
I think even just being able to, obviously as a drummer, I think it's probably not that big of a deal, but being able to pick out any of these guys and be like, oh, they'd play it like this.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, all right.
When we would record guitar solos in the studio, Chris or whoever would always say like, okay, who do you want it to sound like? Do you want it to more Jimi Hendrix, or you want it more this or more this or whatever? And I'm like,
Awesome.
I don't know any of that. Do this, play this lick.
That's great. That's
Yeah,
fantastic.
very cool.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad you guys really enjoyed that. That I'm shocked that you like that one more than the other one. See, to me, that illustrates something different. But I can see why you would be like, this is getting the point across a little bit better.
The other one may have changed the feel of the riff more than all
Right.
of these did, but you could hear the different bands playing in this.
Well, this one changed the feel of the drums
Yeah.
rather than
Yeah,
the
I mean,
feel
they
of
both
the
did.
song overall. I mean, it did, but yeah, you're right. Right.
Sure.
But it's like, what is the feel? Like, none of those felt like, because the first video was effectively defining genres, and this was making it, I think, a lot easier to apply it to just stuff that we've heard, stuff that,
Sure, you have a
like,
reference
especially
point.
when it's like, whoever would have thought that the drummer was the reason that all of these bands sound so much like this.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was trying to say earlier.
Yeah.
But yes, you get it now, 100%. That's why the drums are so dang important. They determine what the vibe of the song is, and it really. That's why I'm always so fascinated. And see, to me, I think about every different section of the song that way. This way. Like, why are we hearing what we're hearing? And for me, one of the most important things is, why are we hearing the sound that we're hearing? Because if he would have changed the sound of those drums for every one of them, it would have made it even completely more different. You know what I mean? But think about, like, I always say this when there's keyboards in a song, like, when you have a keyboard player, you literally have every sound ever created by man at your fingertips. So it's like, how do you choose what sound fits best into what you're trying to do? I've done it myself. When you write a little keyboard part or a piano part or whatever, and then you go through every patch. Go to a patch, play the part. No, go to a patch, play the part. Go to a different patch, play the part. Go through hundreds of sounds, and then you finally get to one, and it's like, this is it. This fits with what I'm trying to do. And or you don't find one and you record something anyway, and you pan it to the left and you double it and pan it to the right and you triple it and you make a sound out of different sounds. And that same thought process can be applied to the way every single thing you're hearing in any song is. And that's how I listen to music. How is this? Who chose that sound? Why did that particular knob on that guitar amp head, why did they set it at that to get that exact guitar tone? How did the guy who was mixing it EQ it to pull out that frequency so this sound fits nicely without being drowned out by this sound? And then where is it panned in the mix? How much reverb was used? Does it sit on top? Does it fit inside the pocket? All these different things. And that is why I love music so much, is trying to think of all of that.
When you think about electronic artists like Infected Mushroom, for example, like, they make their own patches. Like, they create. It's not even a matter of like, what can I think of that I want this to sound like? It's like, what doesn't exist yet that I want this to sound like?
And then they craft songs around a cool sound that they make. That happens all the time too. And I think a lot of electronic sounds you hear in a lot of things, that no one's really using a preset. Everyone fiddles with some knob just to make it their own thing.
Yeah.
But like, and that's like back in the day with Cody with like Kraftwerk and stuff, right? When you got a wall, when the wall is your instrument and you push a button or touch a knob, and then you push another button, that old sound is gone forever. You could never get that sound back. And that's why all that oscillating stuff and all that crazy old synthesizer stuff on those giant wall synthesizers is so incredible, and why it's such an amazing thing.
And somehow they still make it sound like Kraftwerk.
Yeah.
As opposed to just, if you can make any sound you want, it's easy to, I would think it'd be easy to stray from your own sound.
It's exactly.
And it's easier now because then once you make patches, you can save them and then load them as presets. But before on those modular synth walls, like, I don't know how they're making sure that it always sounds like them. But what I was going to say earlier is I think a certain level of expertise comes from when you get to the point of like, what do I want this thing to sound like when you're talking about, doing a synth patch or something. Instead of cycling through the presets, you just go, yeah, I like that one. And then you turn a bunch of knobs to make this match that, and then you play it. And that, I feel like once you it's the modular synth, because one of the first audio events that I went to out here was a bunch of different sound designers who had their own like modular synth setups, like maybe like a big suitcase kind of worth of size, not a whole wall, but definitely, 3 or 4 rows of racked up synths onto like a piece of wood or whatever, and just showed the signal flow for like, we just turning knobs and plugging cables into each other, and now you get this. And it's like, I've played with virtual versions of that, like VCV Rack and stuff a little bit, but that would be so much fun to just have like an analog modular synth wall or box or something to just like turn that, and then by the time you get it over here, it's 1,000,000,000% different than it ever was.
Yep, and then you get one new component and you plug it in, and the whole thing is different and new now.
Yeah, how are these bands that start in the 70s? It's like, how do they keep the same sound through the 90s, you know? I guess they didn't, usually.
Well, you just know what you're doing. A lot of it was like, you know, and then once you got it recorded, you know, you didn't necessarily recreate it live.
At some point, though, you get some new equipment, you're almost emulating your own sound.
Exactly, 1,000,000%.
Totally.
1,000,000%. And the thing is, that happens with all the other instruments too. Like Metallica has a signature guitar tone.
They do.
All these bands have their own signature guitar sound, and then a kid learning how to play the guitar is like, I like Metallica, I want to sound like Metallica. You go out and you try to buy the gear, you save up and you buy the gear Metallica used to record their album that's your favorite, and you try to get that same sound, and then you start a band with a guy who's doing the same thing with Lars's drums, and the guy who, you know, and that's how bands form. And then you're like, okay, well, we like Metallica. What else do we like? We also like, you know, this other band. So let's put those two things together and record an album.
And now you've got a pile of music that's like an influence of 5 bands.
Yep,
all
exactly.
pushed through a different filter than it would ever have been.
Yep, and that's how music is made. So, yeah, it's really fascinating. And so when we get to Raunchy, it's going to be really fun, I think, for me to see what Cody thinks. Because I think at first you're going to be like, I didn't care for that. And I think the more we listen to it, the more you'll be like, okay, I've gotten over the fact that I don't like the way the dude sounds singing, so I'm going to just listen to the drums instead, or I'm going to listen to the guitars or whatever instead. And what will inevitably end up happening is you'll find the things you do like and the things you don't like about an individual band, regardless of, you know, the genre won't matter anymore, because you'll be a captive.
Do you think... several different times during this video, I've thought this, that a really great gateway band for metal, or I suppose gateway album, is that most recent Bad Omens album.
I think for the right person, that could be. I think for Cody, that would be like the worst thing ever, because I don't think Cody likes either aspect of what they were doing that made that special, right? Okay. The heaviest that got was too heavy, and the poppiest that got is a style of modern pop electronic music that Cody does not care for either. Really. Okay. So I think, but in general, no, I don't think so. See, one of the things we were going to talk about in this video is what bands would you and I recommend for people who are just getting into metal. And I looked online and I did some cursory views, and I found a Reddit thread that was talking about some famous like article, Rolling Stones article, or some band, some like music journalist website that released a famous article of like the top 10 bands to show people. And those bands were Metallica, Judas Priest, Megadeth, Slayer, Iron Maiden, and all that stuff that made me do exactly what you just did. Like, oh my God, seriously? I swear to God, people stopped listening after 1990. Stop it. But the thing is, so then what I found was this great article, and I was going to link to it and have us talk about it, but whatever, I don't even know what it was anymore. The article was saying what you have to do is start with what the person already likes, and then find a band that is that slowly incorporates heavier elements, and then slowly over time show them something with a little bit more, something with a little bit more, something with a little bit more. And they had a great example of in this video, I'm sorry, on this website, they had like links to things. So what it was rounds of 3 bands. So in the first round, they said they liked whatever. We'll just say, for example, and this is not what they use, but let's say you are a fan of Imagine Dragons. If you're a fan of Imagine Dragons, Bad Omens is a great band to get to eventually. But the thing is, you're going to scare people off immediately with how heavy they get. So what you have to do is find something like first of all, find what the heaviest Imagine Dragons song is, right? And then and talk to them about that. Then find a band that incorporates elements like Imagine Dragons drum samples and things like that, but that has more guitar in it, because Imagine Dragons doesn't have a lot of guitar. Then eventually work your way to something else. And then eventually in this, they were like, they did eventually get to like a slower Metallica song. And then they got to a Demon Hunter song with all clean vocals. And then they got to something else. And then it's all about reacting to what the person says that they like about these different things. If they like the Demon Hunter song with all clean vocals, maybe show them one with a little bit of screaming vocals in it too, and then they can use that as a band to gateway themselves into it. So it was really great website. I wish I would have taken note of what it was.
Several years ago, I made a playlist, a 50-song playlist for my sister that started off with, it was basically just that from beginning out to hilarious, where this is just, Fear and Loathing or whatever.
Lorna Shore.
But yeah, basically.
Yeah.
But I basically constructed it that way, where it's like, here's something that's completely clean vocal with not a whole lot of, whatever, that is well within the realm of something that you already like. And then I just very slowly worked that out. And I think it helped a little for her. She didn't make it all the way to the end, but I didn't expect her to either.
Right. You probably wouldn't like any of that stuff at the very end.
Me, yeah, there was some stuff at the end I was like, well, the LOL, like, I don't even like this song.
Right.
But yeah, I think it definitely can be done. I think it can be done for just about anybody.
I agree. And I think there's definitely enough metal out there. Like Cody, you've showed interested before, and like you're like, we should try to listen to some doom or stoner metal and stuff.
Yeah.
And like there's my favorite stoner doom band is Avatarium is what they're called. They have a new album coming out in February. So I was going to ask you if you wanted to react to that with me and see what you think, because they're the perfect combination of a female vocalist I just love her voice, and there's no screaming or anything like that at all. And there's a lot of organ in it, so it's very Deep Purple inspired. And then the guitar riffs are very heavy, but they're slow, plotty heavy. There's nothing really that's fast, and there are long guitar solos, and so it's like really interesting. And I think it would be something that you would like a lot. And then from that, you could get into more stuff. Like for me, one of the bands that helped me a lot was a band called Evergrey, and that was the first like fast, intense metal band that I'd ever heard that had no screaming in it. They were like the other bands I was listening to, like Soilwork and Nemec and Raunchy and all these bands, but they had no screaming whatsoever. It was literally just clean singing the entire time. And the guy who's the singer for the band, Tom England, he has a awesome voice. And so, something like that would be a good band I would recommend for people who are already into heavy music but just can't listen to the screaming at all. That would be something to help people get into faster music. I think Chris...
Protest the Hero is good for that.
Don't they scream a lot, though, or do they not?
They have at least one album with zero screaming.
Interesting. We should listen to some Protest the Hero. You should show me like 4 or 5 songs in a video, because
I think that would be a blast.
Yeah, because when you say Protest the Hero, I think of something that they are not.
That might be
completely different than what I think they are. And another band I was going to even mention too, I have their CD sitting right over here. Cody, Leprous, right? You listened to this album with me earlier this year.
Yeah.
And they are completely probably different than what you thought a metal band could be at all.
Right.
A majority of their songs are not metal at all. A majority of every individual song. It gets to be metal sort of later, but the first 40% of the song is not metal at all in the slightest. So, that's, but he never screams. Well, there's that one song, I guess, that had screaming in it, but the 3 albums of theirs I've heard, there was the total of 10 seconds of harsh vocals. Yeah. So, there's a lot of bands out there people could use, and I definitely would not. Yep, another great example. Any of those new metal bands that like people, Linkin Park is a new metal band, but people don't realize how Chester was screaming his ass off in a lot of that. Like, people just don't realize it because the music wasn't really like that, But he was metal, full-on metal vocal screaming, and I think one of the great injustices of the universe is that we never got Chester singing on a full-on metal album. I think it would have happened eventually later on in his life, but we just will never get that. And I think that's a tragedy. But people don't, even like I said, Seven Dust earlier, like Seven Dust has no what I would consider screaming at all. He has some kind of yelly stuff, and he has like a nice gruff lower vocal, but it's never grunty, screamy at all. But they're really heavy. But I would not
just kind of like Rise Against in that way.
Yes, yep. They're
Rise
another
Against
great
has
band.
a really interesting vocal style.
They're like a pop punk type of thing, like
kind of, yeah. I would almost like it's almost like a shout. It's not screaming, it's not yelling, but it's shouty in a way, shout singing.
Yep. And so there's so many bands a person could use, even something like a band that's got some really surprising like heavy songs, like something stupid from when we were in high school, like Trapped or something. Or even like you said, Nickelback. Like Nickelback has some pretty heavy songs. Bullet is a great heavy song.
Side of a Bullet. Absolutely.
And POD, great, like really heavy songs, but they became famous with Youth of a Nation, And so, Poppy, has whole pop albums, and then a rock album, Flux, and then the most death-curdling
savage metal
album of the year for sure. But then Crystallize is also on that album. So so it's like there's so many great artists right now that would be a perfect.
She's such a good gateway because she's got pop and metal in the same songs.
And for her, it's almost like her entire career is a concept album. A concept career is what her career is, because she's a fake person. Like she started out literally pretending she was a robot for like 10 years. And she I've never seen a video of her ever breaking character, ever. And then all of a sudden she's like, metal. We're going to do metal. And she just was like 1000% metal. It's like, where did this come from? And it was incredible. And then she went completely away from that for 2 albums. And now she just released probably one of the best metal albums I've ever heard. And it's like, you are flipping kidding me. Like it's people, it's the metal world allowing people to have no limitations or restrictions. Really it is. The stigma of not doing certain things is basically gone now. And especially you have a band like Sleep Token, that got so popular 2 years ago, and they have maybe one of the heaviest moments I've ever heard at the end of one of their songs. It's a 7-minute song, and it's like shoegaze for 6 minutes, and then the 7th final minute is just like crushing, devastating, apocalyptic death, and it's incredible, and then like, but you said Bad Omens, same thing. Like it's the mixing of all these different things into something that at the end of the day, like I said, like Bad Omens has whole songs that aren't metal, but because they have some metal sections that are so clearly metal, I think of them as a metal band. Yeah. Like the metal parts of them trump anything else that they're doing. You know what I mean?
Right. Because what are they otherwise? Like you just can't define it.
Like you have to kind of base something in the music sphere off of how heavy they get. And because they get so heavy, they're obviously a metal band. That's just what they are as a whole.
Yeah.
New Spirit Box, same thing. Can't wait for that album. It's coming out soon, Chris. Cannot wait. Possible album of the year coming out in the next month. Let's go. Yeah.
And it's great. It's crazy to have like album of the year drop in January.
Yep. My album of the year from last year came out January 7th.
Nice.
Yep, in the
that
deluxe.
2021, that Poppy album, I disagree. That was a January album.
Yep. And then in December, I think, or the next, that same year, they released I Disagree More, which is the definitive version of that, obviously. And so, yeah, it's incredible. All right, so thank you, everybody, for watching. I think we've scratched the surface of metal, and I'm really curious to see if anybody watches this all the way through, if people enjoy this kind of video. This is more of a podcasty thing than we've probably ever really done before in terms of, we are not really reacting to music here.
It's more of a round table.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And so, yeah, I don't know.
I've got a one quote from Wikipedia that I'd like to read.
We can end on this.
Okay, because we've talked a lot about what is metal and what isn't metal. And they have a quote on the Wikipedia page from an expert, Gene Simmons. He said, when was this quote from? This is from 93.
Okay.
He says, "When I think of heavy metal, I've always thought of elves and evil dwarves and evil princes and princesses. A lot of Maiden and Priest records were real metal records. I sure as hell don't think Metallica's metal, or Guns N' Roses is metal, or Kiss is metal. It just doesn't deal with the ground opening up and little dwarves coming out and riding dragons. Like Bad Dio records."
I was gonna say earlier that there's an entire arm of metal that we haven't touched yet at all, and it's like the Ronnie James Dio fantasy metal.
Yeah.
And
Led Zeppelin.
That quote,
Yeah.
because when you said this quote's from '93, my initial reaction was, oh, so it's before he went crazy, and it is not before he went crazy.
No.
But it's interesting that he didn't even consider Kiss metal back then.
Oh, I don't think
Kiss
anyone's
is
ever considered Kiss metal.
Kiss
Not
is the
even-
least metal of all of the bands that he mentioned.
Well, I thought maybe they would have a different perspective within the band.
Yeah,
Right,
by
yeah,
being
for sure.
Kiss. Yeah,
Yeah, they
yeah,
could
but
have.
to say Metallica's not metal, Kiss is metal.
No, the thing is, they do have the whole like demon thing going for them. You know,
Yeah.
like so that is kind of that is metal in a certain way. You know, I mean,
Sure.
Yeah, I guess. They've got more of like a...
It's glam metal to a certain
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
And that counts. I'm not into like any sort of glam metal.
a circus clown mime thing.
Yeah.
yeah,
But anyway, so it has to deal. You have to have dwarves and
dwarves and elves. Hey, honestly, there's a lot of metal I do like that has some of that stuff in
There
it.
is. It's
you
a
know?
real thing.
Now, most of the bands, no. Are we going to hear any of that in Raunchy? No. But
What country
Raunchy's
is Raunchy from?
Denmark, and their lyrical content.
Do they sing in English?
Yes, it's all English, and their lyrical content is going to be. I am going to have to censor out a lot of lyrics.
Can you find the clean versions?
At least it's
What do you mean?
Is there
That's what it
clean
says on the
versions
tin.
of the songs out there?
Nah, there's no clean versions of any metal stuff, Cody. You are
right.
barking up the wrong
No
tree
Walmart
there.
versions? Of
No,
Metallica
Walmart.
albums?
Walmart just would sell the albums the way they were without any parental advisory sticker. All of the albums that I bought when I was in high school, the new metal records that had like 1 or 2 swear words on them, they all came from Walmart. You know, I'm thinking of Stereo Mud, Soil, 40 Below Summer. Although those had the
Well, that's going to do it for this video.
yeah. Okay. Sorry there. Thank you all so much. If you have ideas of things we could do like this in the future, things we totally skipped over, please let us know in the comments, or even better yet than that.
Or if you have suggestions for me.
You know, for the absolutely, or
Yeah,
for
make
us
a
to
group
react to.
playlist for Cody.
But better than all of that, come to our Discord and literally talk to us about what we should have included and what we said and what you liked or didn't like or what you disagreed with us on. Let us know, and it's a great place to be. Thank you
Come
all
see us
very
live
much.
at our individual homes.
Yeah.
Let's not do that.
If you come to my town, I'll take you out we'll go get a beer.
Well, I don't live
the
in a
least I could
town,
do for going
so
out to
you
there,
can't. We
whatever
can't do that in my place. We just have to go sit out and look at the cows or something. But yeah, we'll see. Okay, thank you all so much for watching. We will see you all next time when we're doing our Raunchy videos. Very excited. If you don't know who Raunchy is as a band, just check those videos out. I promise they're a great band worth your time. Thank you so much. We'll see you all then.